Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I'm not sure I should even be writing this down, but I need to get it out. It's been eating at me for over 60 years now. The nightmares still come and the VA doctors keep upping my meds, but nothing helps. Maybe putting it all down will give me some peace. I was a sergeant with the 101st Airborne in '57, stationed at Cam Ranh Bay. We were doing what they called advisory missions back then, before Vietnam became the shitstorm everyone knows about. Just a bunch of grunts trudging through jungle, training ARVN troops, trying not to get malaria or step on something that would blow your leg off. July 17th. I remember the date because it was my kid brother's birthday back home. Our platoon, 12 men including me, was on a 3-day patrol about 15 clicks west of base. The jungle was thick as hell, humid enough to drown standing up. You couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction because of the vegetation, and everything smelled like rot and earth. Around 1400 hours, Martinez spotted something through the trees. We approached carefully and found an ARVN soldier, badly wounded, propped against a tree. His uniform was torn to shreds, and he had deep lacerations across his chest and abdomen. Not bullet wounds or shrapnel, but long, jagged tears like from an animal attack. Peterson, our medic, started working on him immediately. The guy was delirious, eyes rolling back in his head. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and started rambling in Vietnamese, which I didn't understand except for a few words. Our translator, Nguyen, listened closely, his face going pale. "What's he saying?" I asked. Nguyen swallowed hard. "He says, 'It's still here. Get away from here.'" "What's still here?" I pressed. The dying man's eyes suddenly focused on me, and in broken English, he whispered, "Big, big like tree. Hungry." Then he passed out. We radioed for an evac chopper. While we waited, I had the men set up a perimeter. Something had torn that ARVN soldier up badly, and I wasn't taking chances. Could have been a tiger, though they weren't common in that area. The chopper arrived about an hour later, took the wounded man, and left us in silence again. I should have listened to that warning, should have marched us straight back to base, but orders were orders, and we had another day of patrol to complete. We continued on our designated route until dusk approached. We set up camp in a small clearing, posting 2 men on watch at all times. I took first shift with Dawson, a farm boy from Nebraska who could spot movement in the dark like nobody's business. The jungle at night is never quiet. There's always a background hum of insects, frogs, and who knows what else. But around 2100 hours, everything went silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. The hair on my arm stood up. In the jungle, silence means danger. "Sarge, you hear that?" Dawson whispered. "I don't hear anything," I said. "That's the problem." We strained our ears, scanning the darkness beyond our small camp. Then we heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound, like something heavy walking carefully through the underbrush. Not the chaotic movement of an animal, but deliberate steps, something that didn't want to be heard. I was about to wake the others when the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard ripped through the night. It wasn't human, wasn't animal, something in between that froze my blood solid. The men jolted awake, grabbing weapons, disoriented. "What the fuck was that?" Johnson hissed, his eyes wide. Before I could answer, we heard it again, closer this time. Then came the sound of branches breaking, undergrowth being crushed, something large moving fast toward the source of the scream. "Form up," I ordered. "Martinez, Richards, stay with the gear. Everyone else with me." We moved through the jungle toward where we'd heard the scream, using our flashlights sparingly. The foliage was so dense, we had to use machetes to clear a path. The air felt thick, not just with humidity, but with something else. A tension, a wrongness I can't explain. After pushing through about 200 meters of undergrowth, we reached another small clearing. I signaled the men to stop and kill their lights. There was enough moonlight filtering through the canopy to see the clearing, and what I saw there still haunts me. Standing in the center was... Christ, I don't even know how to describe it. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. Not fur like an animal, but hair, hanging in clumps. Its proportions were all wrong, arms too long, legs too thick. It was hunched over something on the ground, and I could hear wet, tearing sounds. Peterson gasped. The thing's head snapped up, and I swear to God, its eyes reflected our hidden flashlight beams like a cat's, 2 glowing orbs in the darkness. But they were set in a face that was almost human. Almost, but wrong in ways that made my stomach turn. It was chewing on what looked like bones. I realized with horror that there were remnants of another ARVN patrol scattered around it. Torn rucksacks, equipment, and things I don't want to describe. We stood frozen, none of us breathing. Then Wilson, a jumpy kid on his first deployment, lost it. He raised his M14 and fired a burst that lit up the clearing like daylight. The thing moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. It didn't run away. It charged straight at us. Wilson got off another burst before the creature reached him, grabbing him by the shoulders. I'll never forget the sound of his screams as it bit into his leg, the crack of bone audible even over the gunfire that erupted from the rest of us. We all opened fire then. The muzzle flashes strobed the clearing, giving glimpses of the nightmare in freeze frames. Bullets hit it. I know they did, but it didn't go down. It threw Wilson aside like a rag doll and lunged at Nguyen, who emptied his magazine into its chest before diving aside. "Fall back!" I shouted. "Fall back to camp!" We grabbed Wilson, who was sobbing and clutching his shattered leg, and retreated. The thing let out another of those ungodly screams and crashed into the jungle, moving parallel to us. We made it back to the others and quickly explained what had happened. Martinez and Richards looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. We fashioned a stretcher for Wilson from branches and ponchos, gathered our gear, and started moving toward base as fast as we could. "What about the rest of our patrol?" Johnson asked. "Fuck the patrol," I said. "We're getting out of here." The jungle seemed to close in around us as we moved. Every shadow might have been that thing. Every rustle of leaves could have been it circling back. Wilson was in shock, his leg a mess of blood and splintered bone. Peterson gave him morphine, but we all knew he needed a real hospital, and soon. We'd made it maybe a mile when we heard it again, that unnatural movement through the foliage, too controlled to be an animal. I signaled everyone to stop and be quiet. For a minute there was nothing, then a low rumbling sound, almost like a growl but deeper, came from somewhere to our right. "It's stalking us," Dawson whispered. "Spread out," I ordered. 5-meter intervals, Johnson and Daniels on the stretcher. We moved forward again, slower now, everyone scanning the darkness. The thing kept pace with us, sometimes getting ahead, sometimes falling behind, but always staying just out of sight. It was toying with us. After another half hour of this nightmare, Richards, who was on point, held up his hand to stop us. He pointed to something on the ground. When I moved up to look, I saw fresh blood droplets on the leaves, not from Wilson, who was behind us. That's when it happened. The thing burst from the foliage to our left, moving so fast it was just a dark blur. It grabbed Daniels before anyone could react, yanking him away from Wilson's stretcher. He didn't even have time to scream before it dragged him into the darkness. Johnson dropped the stretcher and opened fire in the direction they'd disappeared. We all did, emptying our magazines into the jungle. Wilson screamed as he hit the ground, but we couldn't help him. We were fighting for our lives. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" I yelled when I realized we were just wasting ammo. In the silence that followed, we could hear the sounds. Wet, tearing sounds and Daniel's strangled cries growing weaker. Then nothing. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered. What the fuck is that thing? I was asking myself the same question. It wasn't a tiger or any animal I knew. The locals had stories about jungle spirits and forest demons, but I'd always dismissed that as superstition. Now, I wasn't so sure. "We need to keep moving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Johnson, Richards, get Wilson. Everyone else form a perimeter. We move together." I felt something warm running down my face and realized I'd been hit by something, a branch or bullet fragment during the chaos. A gash above my eye was bleeding freely, but I didn't have time to deal with it. We pushed on, the jungle growing thicker, as if it was trying to stop us. The blood loss was making me dizzy, but I forced myself to stay alert. The thing was still out there, and I was responsible for getting my men home. Then I tripped over a root and went down hard. My head hit something, a rock or fallen log, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, it was nearly dawn, the jungle transitioning from black to grey. I was alone. My rifle was gone, and there was no sign of the others. I tried to call out, but my voice was a rasp. The gash on my head had crusted over with dried blood, and my whole body ached. That's when I heard it. Heavy footsteps, methodically moving through the jungle, coming closer. I lay still, playing dead. I could feel the ground vibrate slightly with each step. The footsteps stopped right next to me. I kept my eyes closed, barely breathing. I could sense it standing over me, could smell a thick, musky odor like wet animal fur mixed with something sickly sweet and metallic. Blood. Something touched my face. Not a hand, but not exactly a paw either. Something in between. It turned my head to the side, and I felt hot breath on my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I wouldn't make it 2 steps. It sniffed me, made that deep rumbling sound again, then it left. Just walked away, footsteps receding into the jungle. I waited until I couldn't hear it anymore, then waited longer, afraid it was another trick. Finally, I forced myself to get up. The morning light was filtering through the canopy now, giving me enough visibility to see what was around me. I almost wished it hadn't. About 20 meters away, I found what was left of my platoon. Their equipment was scattered across a small area, helmets with bullet holes punched through them, rifles bent and broken, and there were parts, human parts that I won't describe, some still in uniform, some not. No complete bodies. I threw up until there was nothing left but bile. Then I gathered what I could, a canteen, a pistol with 1 magazine, a compass, and a tattered map. I studied the map, trying to orient myself. If I was reading it right, base was about 15 miles southeast. 15 miles of jungle with that thing still out there. I started walking, keeping the rising sun on my left. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like the creature. The jungle was alive again with normal sounds, which I took as a good sign. Maybe the thing was gone. Maybe it had taken what it wanted and left. Hours passed. The heat became unbearable, and I rationed my water carefully. The wound on my head throbbed, and I knew infection was a real risk, but I kept moving. What else could I do? Around midday, I heard the unmistakable thump of helicopter rotors. I ran toward the sound, stumbling through the undergrowth, not caring about the noise I was making. I broke through into a clearing just as a Huey was setting down, a resupply run to another patrol. I've never been so happy to see other human beings in my life. They took me aboard, looking at me like I was a ghost. I must have been a sight, covered in blood, wild-eyed, babbling about a monster in the jungle. They flew me back to base, where I was immediately taken to the infirmary. That's where I learned what had happened to the others. A search party had found Peterson about 5 miles from where I'd been. He'd carried Wilson until he collapsed, then continued alone until another patrol found him. He told them about the attack before he died from his wounds. They sent out more search parties but found nothing. No bodies, no creature, nothing except some strange tracks that no one could identify. The official report blamed it on Viet Cong guerrillas, or maybe a tiger attack. Those who weren't there believed it. Those who were, well, most of them didn't make it back. I spent 2 weeks in the infirmary before they shipped me stateside. During that time, I spoke with an old Vietnamese man who worked on base. When I described what we'd seen, he nodded knowingly and told me about something called Nguoi Rung, the forest people. Giant, hairy creatures that had lived in the deepest jungles since before humans arrived. Most of the locals avoided certain areas because of them. Years later, when stories about Bigfoot started becoming popular in America, I recognized what we'd encountered. But it wasn't like the gentle giant from the Patterson film. This thing was a predator, intelligent and vicious. I've been to therapy, I've taken the pills. I've tried to convince myself it was just a bear or a group of gorillas or my mind playing tricks. But I know what I saw. I know what took my men. And sometimes, even now, I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like it's standing over my bed, deciding whether to take me too. If you've read this far, you probably think I'm just a crazy old vet with PTSD. Maybe I am. But if you ever find yourself in a jungle, any jungle, and everything goes quiet, run. Don't look back. Just run. Story 2. I've been holding this in for too long. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. I know what I saw that night on Morningstar Road. And it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a costume. And it definitely wasn't my imagination. I'm Jason Thompson. I've lived in Carlisle my whole life. It's a small town where everybody knows everybody's business, and local legends are passed down like family recipes. Growing up here, you hear all kinds of stories about Morningstar Road. Most folks around here avoid driving it at night if they can help it. For those who don't know, Morningstar Road cuts through about 5 miles of dense forest. It's got these nasty S-turns that are treacherous even in good weather. The place has history, bad history. Back in the 70s, there was supposedly a double murder at one of the campsites just off the road. A woman died in a house fire somewhere along that stretch too. But what Morningstar is really known for are the Bigfoot sightings. I always rolled my eyes at those stories. My stepmother, who grew up here, would tell us about how her uncle saw one crossing the road back in the 60s, how her cousin's friend heard strange howls while camping, how her neighbor found weird footprints by their trash cans. I chalked it all up to small-town folklore, something to make our boring little place seem more interesting. Even my high school English teacher, Mr. Benson, a totally normal, level-headed guy, claimed he saw something one night. He described a 7 or 8 foot tall creature crossing the road right in front of his truck. Said it moved unlike anything he'd ever seen. I remember thinking he was either pulling our legs or had seen a bear standing on its hind legs. I was always the skeptical type. Still am, about most things. I hunt, fish, and spend more time in these woods than most people. I know what animals live here. I know what they sound like, how they move, what tracks they leave. I've always prided myself on finding logical explanations for weird stuff. That changed on January 19th last year. It had snowed pretty heavily that day, about 8 inches of fresh powder on top of what was already there. The temperature had dropped to around 15 degrees by nightfall. My buddy Mike and I had been at another friend's house playing video games and drinking a few beers. Not me, though. I was driving. We left around 11:30 p.m. Mike lives on the other side of Morningstar Road from where we were, so we had to take that route. I wasn't thrilled about it given the road conditions, but it was either that or add another 20 minutes to the drive by going around. My truck is decent in snow, but I was still being extra careful. The moonlight was reflecting off all that white snow, which actually made visibility not terrible. You could see the woodline pretty clearly on both sides of the road. When we hit the first of the S-turns, I slowed way down. Couldn't have been going more than 5 mph. The truck was struggling for traction even at that speed. We were halfway through the second curve when I saw it. Between 2 trees that formed a Y shape about 30 feet from the road stood this thing. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A bear? No way. A person? Absolutely not. This thing was massive, tall, way taller than any person I've ever seen. It was covered in thick, dark brown hair. Not fur like a bear, but not exactly like human hair either. It was longer, shaggier. When my headlights hit it, the creature raised one of its arms to shield its eyes. That's when I noticed how freakishly big its hand was. The fingers were long, thick, almost like a human's, but way out of proportion. And the arm itself, muscular, powerful. For a split second, I could see its face. Not clearly, but enough to make out yellowish eyes reflecting in my headlights. The strangest part was its teeth. It briefly, I don't know if snarled is the right word, but its mouth opened and I could see teeth bigger than human teeth, with this brownish-yellow tint to them. Then it turned away from us. That's when I noticed the muscles in its back. I'm not making this up. You could see defined muscles, triceps, lats, just like a bodybuilder, but on a whole different scale. It wasn't some fat, lumbering thing. This creature was built, strong. It walked, not ran, but walked, down the hill away from us. Its movement was fluid, not like a person in a costume stumbling around, not like a bear awkwardly standing. It moved with purpose, with confidence. Mike started freaking out, screaming. I was frozen for a second, then snapped out of it when he grabbed my arm. "Go! Fucking go!" he kept shouting. "Just drive!" I yelled back, finally finding my voice. I floored it. Probably not the smartest move on an icy road, but fear takes over in moments like that. Mike's place was only about a minute down the road. We skidded into his driveway, and he practically fell out of my truck. He was pale, shaking. I was too. "Did you fucking see that?" he kept saying over and over. I nodded. We stood there in his driveway for a good 10 minutes, just trying to process what we'd seen. Neither of us wanted to say the word Bigfoot. It sounds ridiculous, but we both knew that's what we were thinking. Maybe it was a guy in a costume, I suggested weakly, even though I knew better. On Morningstar Road, in the middle of the night, in a fucking blizzard, Mike shot back. He had a point. Plus, no costume could capture the natural way that thing moved. The muscle definition. Those eyes. I drove home alone after that, white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole way, constantly checking my mirrors and scanning the tree line. I didn't see it again that night, but I felt watched the entire time. I couldn't sleep when I got home. I kept replaying those few seconds over and over in my mind, trying to find some explanation that made sense, some way to convince myself I hadn't seen what I knew I had seen. The next day, I called Mike. We agreed to go back and look for tracks. In daylight, with the snow stopped, Morningstar Road didn't seem so ominous. We found the spot easily enough. I recognized the Y-shaped trees, but the area where the creature had stood was on a steep embankment, and with all the fresh snow and wind, any tracks would have been filled in or blown away. We followed the slope downhill anyway, pushing through knee-deep snow. About 50 yards down, Mike called me over. There, partially obscured by fresh powder, was what looked like a footprint. A big one, way bigger than my size 11 boot. It was hard to get a clear outline, but it looked maybe 16 to 17 inches long. I took a picture with my phone, but it doesn't really show much, just a vague impression in deep snow. That was the only potential evidence we found. No hair caught on branches. No other clear tracks. Nothing. I've told this story to a few friends since then. Most laugh it off. Some suggest we saw a moose. We don't have moose around here. Or a bear, in January, standing upright with defined back muscles. A couple have suggested we were drunk or high. I wasn't either. One friend even suggested mass hallucination, which might make sense if it was just me and Mike, but doesn't explain all the other sightings over the years. I've been an avid hunter my whole life. I'm in these woods all the time. I know what's supposed to be out there and what isn't. Since that night, I've felt different every time I go hunting. I'm more alert, more aware that I might not be at the top of the food chain after all. I catch myself looking over my shoulder more often, listening harder for sounds that don't belong. The creature didn't show any aggression toward us. It seemed almost as startled by our presence as we were by its, but that doesn't make the experience any less terrifying. There's something out there in our woods that science says shouldn't exist. I've tried researching Bigfoot sightings in our area since then. Turns out there have been dozens reported over the years, many along Morningstar Road. Most descriptions match what I saw: 7-8 feet tall, muscular build, dark hair, walking upright. My stepmother wasn't surprised when I finally told her. She just nodded knowingly and said, "Thompson men have been seeing that thing since my grandfather's time. Welcome to the club. Nobody wants to join." I've looked into getting trail cameras to set up in that area, but I haven't worked up the courage to go back there alone. Part of me wants proof, concrete evidence that would validate what I saw. Another part of me is scared of what might happen if I go looking for this thing. One detail keeps sticking with me: those eyes. They weren't mindless animal eyes. There was intelligence there, recognition. For a brief moment we looked at each other, and I felt understood. Not in a friendly way, not in a threatening way, just acknowledged. Like two different species sizing each other up across an evolutionary divide. It's been over a year now, and I still think about it almost daily. I drive different routes to avoid Morningstar Road at night. When I do have to take it, my heart races the entire time. Every shadow between the trees makes me flinch. Mike has since moved away, says it's for a job opportunity, but I know better. He couldn't handle being so close to those woods anymore. We don't really talk about it when we catch up on the phone. It's like this unspoken thing between us, this experience that changed how we see the world, but that we can't fully process. I'm still a skeptical person by nature. I still look for logical explanations, but I know what I saw that night. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person, it wasn't my imagination. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching from between the trees as cars pass by, if it recognizes my truck when I drive through, if it remembers our eyes meeting in that brief, impossible moment. I've never been a spiritual person, but this experience has made me question a lot about what I thought I knew. If this creature exists, this thing that science says is impossible, what else might be out there that we don't understand? I don't expect anyone reading this to believe me. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I know what I saw that snowy night on Morningstar Road, and no matter how much time passes, I'll never forget those yellow eyes staring back at me from between the trees, that massive hand raised against my headlights, or that feeling of absolute certainty that I was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, but absolutely does. I still don't have answers, just questions and the memory of those few terrifying seconds that changed how I see the world. I'm writing this down because I need someone else to know, because maybe someone else has seen it too, because maybe knowing I'm not alone would make it easier to deal with. All I know for sure is that I'll never drive Morningstar Road at night again if I can help it. And when I'm in the woods, I'm always listening now, always watching, always aware that I might not be alone out there. Story 3. I've never shared this story outside my family before. My dad would probably kill me if he knew I was posting this, but I feel like someone out there needs to hear what happened to us 2 years ago. I still think about it almost every day. My name is Manuel Ortega. My dad, Oliver, and I have been working as beekeepers in Arizona for about 6 years now. We maintain hives for several farms in the area, mostly citrus groves where the bees help with pollination and the honey is a bonus. The work isn't glamorous, but it's honest, and we've gotten pretty good at it. This happened at the Sanchez Citrus Grove, about 40 miles outside Phoenix. It's a beautiful place, really isolated, surrounded by desert on one side and hills on the other. We'd been taking care of their hives for about 3 seasons, They had about 15 hives spread throughout the orange trees, and they produced some of the best honey I've ever tasted. It was late May, just getting into the really hot part of the year. We usually checked the hives every couple of weeks during busy season, and we hadn't been out there for about 12 days. Dad and I left home around 5:30 that morning to beat the heat. This was supposed to be a routine check. Smoke the bees to calm them, check for diseases, make sure the queens were doing okay, and harvest any ready honey. Simple stuff we'd done hundreds of times. We arrived at the grove around 7 a.m. It was already getting warm, but not unbearable yet. The property has this long dirt road leading in, and we parked our old pickup near the equipment shed like always. Something felt off right away. There were fewer bees flying around than there should have been. Dad noticed it too. "Something's wrong," he said in Spanish. We quickly put on our protective gear, the white suits with veils, gloves, the whole outfit. Dad grabbed the smoker pot and filled it with pine needles while I gathered the tools. As we walked through the grove toward the first cluster of hives, I smelled something weird, kind of musky and sour, like wet dog mixed with something I couldn't place. I figured maybe a coyote had died nearby. When we got to the first set of hives, my stomach dropped. 3 of the 5 were completely destroyed. Not just damaged, destroyed. Wooden frames shattered and scattered across the ground, honeycomb ripped apart, bees swarming around in confusion. Honey was everywhere, dripping down what remained of the boxes and soaking into the dirt. "What the hell?" I said, looking at the mess. In 6 years of beekeeping, I'd never seen anything like it. Dad knelt down and picked up a piece of broken frame. "Bears," he muttered, though we both knew there hadn't been bears in this part of Arizona for years. If there had been, the owner would have warned us. We moved carefully through the debris, trying to save any bees we could. The damage was brutal. Whatever did this wasn't just trying to get honey. It had completely demolished the structures. Some of the wooden boxes looked like they'd been crushed by enormous hands. "Let's check the others," Dad said. We were both on edge now, wondering if whatever did this was still around. As we walked to the next cluster of hives deeper in the grove, I kept looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was intense. The orange trees created corridors of shadow and light, and every movement of branches in the breeze made me jump. The next group of hives looked untouched from a distance, which was a relief. We approached carefully, Dad working the smoker to keep the bees calm. There were 5 more hives here, tucked between rows of orange trees. The bees seemed agitated, flying in erratic patterns rather than the usual steady streams in and out. I was about 15 feet away when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It looked like a person crouched behind the hives, but way too big, with proportions all wrong. Then it stood up. I froze in place. My dad stopped too, the smoker dangling from his hand. It was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 8, covered in thick hair, deep red like rust on its body, with a lighter auburn color on its head. It had its back to us, and we watched in disbelief as it casually pried the top off one of our hives, like it was opening a cereal box. "Dios mío," my dad whispered. The thing must have heard us, because it turned around slowly. That's when I saw its face. It was almost human, but not quite. The face was flatter with a pronounced brow ridge. But the eyes, I'll never forget them. They were green, startlingly bright against the dark red hair. Above them were thick, bushy eyebrows, almost blackish red. It had honey and wax all over its face and chest, mixed with dozens of bees, some dead, some still alive and crawling through the matted hair. Its beard was caked with golden honey that dripped down onto its chest. The creature didn't seem bothered at all by the bees stinging it. It just watched us with those green eyes. Then it did something that still haunts me. It slowly, deliberately raised a honeycomb to its mouth and began to suck the honey out, maintaining eye contact with us the entire time. I could hear the wet, slurping sound from where I stood. It ate everything, honey, wax, and even the bees trapped in the comb. I don't know how long we all stood there staring at each other. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe a minute. Time kind of stopped making sense. Then my survival instincts kicked in, and I ran. I didn't even think about it. My body just turned and sprinted back toward the truck. I was halfway there when I realized my dad wasn't behind me. I stopped and looked back. Dad was still standing there, facing the creature. He hadn't moved an inch. I shouted for him, but he didn't turn. I should have gone back for him, I should have. But I couldn't make my legs move in that direction. I stood there, paralyzed by indecision and fear. From where I was, I could see Dad slowly raise the smoker and wave it back and forth, like he was trying to scare the thing away. He shouted something I couldn't hear. The creature just tilted its head, seemingly more curious than threatened. It finished the honeycomb it was eating, licked its fingers, and continued watching my father. That's when I noticed something that makes me question my sanity to this day. Despite being covered in bees and clearly being stung repeatedly, the creature showed no signs of pain or irritation. It acted like the bees were nothing more than a minor annoyance. I don't know where I found the courage, but I started walking back toward my dad. Slowly at first, then faster. I was terrified, but I couldn't leave him there. When I got closer, I could hear Dad speaking to it in Spanish, his voice steady but loud. "Go on, get out of here. These aren't yours." He was waving the smoker, sending clouds of pine-scented smoke toward the creature. The Bigfoot, because what else could it have been, seemed almost amused. It reached down without looking away from my dad and picked up 2 intact honeycomb frames from the hive it had opened. Then, with a casual grace that seemed impossible for something so large, it simply turned and walked away into the orange grove. Dozens of angry bees followed it, creating a buzzing cloud around its massive form. Dad didn't move until it disappeared from sight. Then his legs seemed to give out, and he sat heavily on the ground. I ran to him, afraid he might be having a heart attack or something. "Are you okay?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded, his face pale behind the veil. "Did you see it?" he asked in Spanish. "Yes," I said. "What was that thing?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But I think it didn't see me as a threat because of these." He plucked at his white beekeeper suit. "It might have thought I was just another strange-looking animal." We sat there for a few minutes trying to process what had happened. The remaining bees were still agitated, buzzing around us in confused patterns. Finally, Dad stood up. "We need to check the damage and tell Mr. Sanchez," he said, slipping back into practical mode, even though his hands were still shaking. We spent the next 2 hours salvaging what we could from the destroyed hives and checking the untouched ones. 7 of the 15 hives were completely ruined, with thousands of bees lost. It was heartbreaking. We've always respected our bees, treated them almost like family. Seeing them scattered and dying hit us hard. When Mr. Sanchez arrived later that day to check on our progress, Dad tried to explain what we'd seen. My English is better than Dad's, so I helped translate, but even with the right words, the story sounded crazy coming out of our mouths. "A bear," Mr. Sanchez said firmly after listening. "Has to be a bear. They come down from the mountains sometimes. Rare, but it happens." "It wasn't a bear," Dad insisted. "I saw it clearly. It walked on 2 legs. It had hands, not paws, and it was red, not black or brown." Mr. Sanchez looked uncomfortable. "Well, whatever it was, it's gone now. Let's focus on rebuilding the hives." We didn't argue. What was the point? We needed the work. And the truth is, we're not exactly in a position to make waves. Dad came to the US from Mexico 20 years ago. He doesn't have papers. I was born here, but our situation is still precarious. The last thing we needed was attention from authorities who might start asking questions about Dad's status. So we rebuilt the hives. We never reported what we saw to anyone official. Mr. Sanchez eventually installed some game cameras around the property, but nothing ever showed up on them. Whatever visited us that day never returned, at least not while we were there. Sometimes I wonder if we imagined the whole thing, but then I remember those green eyes staring at us, the way it calmly licked honey from its fingers while watching my father, the absolute lack of fear it showed, even with angry bees stinging its face and body. I remember the smell, that musky, sour odor that hung in the air for hours afterward. I've looked online for similar stories. There are accounts of Bigfoot creatures all over the country, but most describe them as dark brown or black. I've never found another report mentioning one with red hair and green eyes. Sometimes I wonder if what we saw was something else entirely, something that doesn't even have a name. Dad refuses to talk about it now. Whenever I bring it up, he changes the subject or tells me to forget about it. But I know he remembers. Sometimes I catch him scanning the trees when we're working the hives, or pausing to sniff the air like he's checking for that distinctive smell. We still work as beekeepers. We still take care of the hives at the Sanchez Grove. But we never go alone anymore, and we always finish before sunset. Some things you only need to see once to know you never want to see them again. I don't know what we encountered that day. I don't know why it wanted the honey so badly, or why it spared my father when he stood his ground. All I know is that the world is stranger than most people realize, and sometimes the monsters from stories turn out to be real, methodically destroying beehives in an orange grove on a hot May morning in Arizona. Story 4. I've never really told this story to people outside my community. It happened when I was 11, back in Nelson House, Manitoba. That's a small indigenous community up north where I grew up, just about 20 houses total, surrounded by thick woods and a lake. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and most nights the only sounds you hear are the wind in the trees and animals moving around in the bush. My name's Jamie Clearwater. I was raised mostly by my grandparents, who taught me everything about living off the land, how to hunt, how to fish, how to track animals. My grandfather made sure I could identify every animal call in those woods by the time I was 9. Jamie, he'd say, the forest speaks to those who know how to listen. I thought I knew all the sounds that belonged in those woods, until that night. It was late June, school was out, and we had about 15 kids playing baseball in the field near the eastern edge of our community. Nothing fancy, just a makeshift diamond with old mitts and a bat that had seen better days. The midnight sun was still giving us enough light to play, even though it was probably around 9 p.m. That's how summer is up north. The days stretch on forever. We were just wrapping up our game when we heard it, a scream that made all of us freeze. It came from behind Old Man Thomas's house, which sat at the edge of the trees. It wasn't like any animal call I'd ever heard before. Not a wolf, not a bear, not even a cougar. It was, I don't know how to describe it exactly, like a person screaming, but deeper and louder than any human could manage. It echoed across the field and seemed to hang in the air. "What was that?" my friend Robbie whispered. Nobody answered. We were all just standing there, our baseball game forgotten. Then we heard it again, only this time it wasn't from behind Old Man Thomas's house. It came from down by the lake, maybe half a kilometer away in the opposite direction. The same exact sound, same pitch, same duration. "It's just an echo," Mark said, but I shook my head. I knew better. "That's not an echo," I said. "It's answering." We listened as the calls continued back and forth. One would stop, then the other would start up, like they were talking to each other, communicating. That's when I started to get really scared. One strange animal, okay, but two of them calling to each other? That was something else entirely. Being kids, our fear quickly turned to curiosity. There were about 10 of us, ranging from 9 to 14 years old, and Robbie's older brother Derek was 15 and thought himself the leader. He motioned for us to follow him toward the lake. "Let's check it out," he said. I know this sounds stupid now, but back then, with safety in numbers and the invincibility of youth, we thought it was a great idea. We moved as a group down the dirt road that led to the lake, the beam from Derek's flashlight bouncing ahead of us. The road dipped down a small hill about 100 meters from the shoreline, with thick bushes on either side. As we got closer to the water, the calls from that direction stopped. Complete silence fell over the area. Even the usual night sounds, frogs, owls, the rustle of small animals, had gone quiet. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. "Maybe it went away," Robbie's sister Jenny whispered. That's when we heard it again, much closer this time. It was coming from the bushes just off the right side of the road, maybe 20 meters ahead of us. The sound made my skin crawl. It wasn't just loud, it had this quality to it, like it contained emotions, anger maybe, or a warning. Derek stopped walking, and we all bunched up behind him. The flashlight beam caught nothing but dark leaves and branches. "What do we do now?" Mark asked. Derek picked up a rock from the side of the road. "Let's find out what it is," he said, and threw the rock into the bushes where the sound had come from. I still remember the soft thud as the rock landed somewhere in the vegetation. For a split second, nothing happened. Then all hell broke loose. The bushes exploded with movement. Something big was thrashing around in there, breaking branches and shaking the whole thicket, and the sound it made. God, that sound. It wasn't like the calls from before. This was a roar of pure rage that seemed to hit us physically, like a wave of sound. It was so loud my ears actually hurt. That's when we saw it. Just for a second, the flashlight beam caught a glimpse of something tall rising up in the bushes. I only saw it for a fraction of a moment, but the image burned into my brain. Massive shoulders, dark hair or fur, and tall, taller than any person I'd ever seen. It must have been at least 7 feet, maybe more. We didn't stick around to get a better look. We ran, all of us screaming, stumbling over each other as we sprinted back up the road toward the community. I've never run so fast in my life. I remember the pure animal panic that took over, the only thought in my head being, get away. We made it to the nearest house, which belonged to the Petersons. We burst through the door without knocking. Inside, 4 adults were sitting around the table playing cards, empty beer bottles scattered around them. They jumped up when we came crashing in, all of us talking at once, trying to explain what we'd seen. "Whoa, whoa, slow down," Mr. Peterson said, holding up his hands. His words were slightly slurred. They'd obviously been drinking for a while. Derek, being the oldest, tried to explain about the screams and what we'd seen in the bushes. The adults exchanged looks that I still remember, half amused, half annoyed. "Probably just a moose," Mrs. Peterson said, patting Jenny on the shoulder. "They can make some weird sounds, especially during mating season." "It wasn't a moose," I insisted. "I know what a moose sounds like. This was different." Mr. Peterson sighed. "Look, it's getting late. You kids should head home. Whatever it was, it's probably long gone by now, scared off by all your yelling." We tried to argue, but they wouldn't listen. Maybe they were too drunk to care, or maybe they just didn't want to deal with a bunch of scared kids messing up their card game. Either way, they practically pushed us out the door with assurances that we were just spooking ourselves. Outside, the night had gotten darker. The calls had stopped, but none of us wanted to go home alone. We moved as a group, dropping each kid off at their house until finally it was just me, walking the last 100 meters to my grandparents' place. I ran those final steps and didn't relax until I was inside with the door locked behind me. I barely slept that night. Every sound from outside made me jump. The worst part was knowing there were 2 of them out there. The one by the lake and the one behind Old Man Thomas's house. I kept thinking about how they were communicating with each other and wondering what they were saying. The next morning, I met up with my friends as soon as I could. None of us had told our parents or grandparents what happened. We were worried they'd either not believe us or forbid us from going out to play. But in the daylight, our fear had turned back into curiosity. "We should go back and look," Derek said. "See if we can find tracks or something." This time, though, we were smart enough to bring adults along. Not our parents, but 3 of the younger men from the community who we thought might actually listen to us. Jake Running Horse, my cousin Thomas, and Billy Whiteclaw. They were in their early 20s, still young enough to remember what it was like to be kids, but old enough to protect us if needed. We told them a toned-down version of what happened, just saying we'd heard weird animal calls and wanted to check it out. They probably thought we were just bored kids looking for adventure, but they agreed to come along. It was just after noon when we headed down to the lake. The day was bright and warm, nothing like the spooky atmosphere of the night before. We reached the spot where we'd heard and seen the thing in the bushes. In daylight, it looked like nothing special, just a thick patch of undergrowth beside the road. Jake and Thomas pushed their way into the bushes while we waited on the road. After a minute, Thomas called out, "Hey, you kids might want to see this." We followed them through the crushed vegetation. Something had definitely moved through here, pushing aside branches and leaving a path of broken twigs. The path led down toward the beach of the lake, where the ground was softer, and there they were, footprints, but not like any footprints I'd ever seen before. They were huge, easily twice the size of Jake's boots. They looked almost human in shape, but wider, with 5 distinct toes. The impressions were deep, suggesting whatever made them was very heavy. They led from the water's edge up into the woods, where we'd heard the creature. "What the hell made these?" Billy whispered, kneeling down to examine one of the prints. None of us answered. We followed the tracks into the woods, moving slowly now, all our earlier bravado gone. The footprints continued for about 50 meters into the forest, then led us to a small clearing that made my blood run cold. In the middle of the clearing was what looked like a bed. Tall grass and ferns had been flattened and arranged in a rough oval shape, big enough for something very large to lie down on. Branches had been pulled down from the surrounding trees and arranged around the edges, creating a kind of nest. It looked deliberate. Something with intelligence had made this. Jake, Thomas, and Billy were dead silent as they stared at the nest. Then they exchanged a look that scared me more than anything else. It wasn't confusion or disbelief on their faces. It was recognition, like they knew exactly what we were looking at but didn't want to say it out loud. "We need to go," Jake said suddenly, his voice tight. "Right now." "But what is it?" Robbie asked. "What made this?" "Nothing," Thomas said firmly. "You kids didn't see anything here, understand? Nothing." Billy was already backing away from the clearing. "This isn't a good place. We shouldn't be here." They practically dragged us away from the clearing, marching us quickly back toward the beach. As we reached the edge of the trees, I looked back over my shoulder. Thomas had stayed behind for a moment. I saw him pull out his lighter and touch it to the edge of the nest. The dry grass caught immediately. "What are you doing?" I called out. He just shook his head and caught up to us. "Erasing a mistake," he muttered. When we got back to the beach, Jake was already scuffing out the footprints with his boots, systematically destroying the evidence. Billy kept watch, scanning the tree line like he expected something to come charging out at us. "Listen to me," Jake said, gathering us kids around him. "You don't talk about what you saw here. Not to your parents, not to each other, not to anybody. You understand? Some things in these woods, they're better left alone." "But what was it?" I persisted. "Those footprints looked like—" "I know what they looked like," Jake cut me off, "and that's why you forget about it. Things like that. When you go looking for them, sometimes they start looking for you too." That shut us up. We walked back to the community in silence. I remember looking back at the woods, thinking about the second creature, the one that had been behind Old Man Thomas's house. We never went looking for signs of that one. After what we found by the lake, none of us wanted to. That night, my grandfather found me sitting on our porch, staring out at the trees. "Something troubling you, Jamie?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. I wanted to tell him everything about the screams, the footprints, the nest, about how Jake, Thomas, and Billy had destroyed the evidence and told us to keep quiet. But Jake's warning kept ringing in my ears, so instead, I just asked a question. "Grandfather, do you believe in Sasquatch?" He was quiet for a long time, smoking his pipe and looking out at the darkening woods. Finally, he said, "Our people have lived in these forests for thousands of years, Jamie. In all that time, do you think we wouldn't know every creature that shares these lands with us?" "So you're saying they're real?" I pressed. He tapped his pipe against the porch railing. "I'm saying there are some questions that are dangerous to ask and some knowledge that's dangerous to seek. The woods keep their own counsel, best to respect their privacy." He never directly answered my question, and I never brought it up again. Over the next weeks, our group of friends gradually stopped talking about what happened that night and what we found the next day. Life returned to normal, or seemed to. But things had changed. I never again went into the woods alone. None of us did. We played closer to home, and we were always home before dark. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind was just right, I would lie in bed and think I could hear those calls again, far off in the distance. Two voices calling back and forth to each other. I'm 36 now. I moved away from Nelson House years ago, but I still go back to visit family. The community has grown, with new houses and even a proper baseball diamond. But the woods are still there, still vast and ancient around the edges of human habitation. Sometimes when I visit, I find myself looking at those trees, remembering. I've never again seen or heard anything like what we experienced that night. But I know they're out there, 2 of them at least. And sometimes on dark nights in my city apartment hundreds of miles away, I still wake up with my heart pounding, thinking I've heard that scream again, that not quite human call echoing through the trees. I've never gone looking for answers. Like Jake said, some things in the woods, when you go looking for them, they start looking for you too. And like my grandfather taught me, some knowledge is dangerous to seek. But I know what I saw, what I heard. And I know that whatever was in those woods that night, it wasn't anything that science has a name for. J'ai dit. Story 5. I still haven't told many people about what happened that night. Part of me doesn't want to be that guy who claims he saw Bigfoot, but I know what I saw. And now that Mrs. Peterson confirmed she saw the same thing, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. I'm 17 and live in northern Manitoba. Our high school is super overcrowded right now because of construction at the other local school, so they've split us into weird shifts. My classes run late, ending at 8:30 p.m., which sucks during winter when it's pitch black by 5 hours. I don't have a car, and my parents both work nights, so I walk home. It's about 9 kilometers along County Road 47. Most of the walk is through nothing but forest. No houses, no streetlights, nothing. Just trees and darkness. I've made this walk dozens of times without issues. I'm used to it, or I was. Last Tuesday started like any other day. I finished my last class, packed up my stuff, and headed out. The first part of my walk home always has some streetlights, and sometimes I'll see other people walking around. But once you hit the highway turnoff, that's it. No more lights, no more civilization. Just you, the road, and whatever's watching from the trees. It was foggy that night. Not the normal kind of fog that sits low to the ground. This was thick, swirling mist that seemed to hang in the air at eye level. There was a north wind, too, blowing right in my face as I walked. My hood kept getting pushed back, and my eyes were watering from the cold. I remember checking my phone as I passed the last streetlight. 8:47 p.m. The battery was at 12%, and I knew I needed to save it in case of an emergency, so I put it away. That was my first mistake. If I'd kept it out, I might have been able to get evidence of what happened next. I'd walked maybe half a kilometer past the last light when I got this weird feeling. I'm not usually paranoid, but something felt different, wrong. The fog was getting thicker, and I could only see maybe 100 feet ahead of me. I kept walking, though. What choice did I have? It was either keep going or turn around and walk all the way back to town, which would have taken even longer. That's when I saw it. About 100 feet ahead, something massive stepped out from the trees on the right side of the road. At first I thought it was just a shadow or the fog playing tricks, but then it moved. It wasn't just big, it was huge. And the way it moved was wrong. It was hunched over, with arms that hung down way too low. The damn thing crossed the entire road, all 4 lanes, in just 4 steps. 4. Do you have any idea how wide that road is? That's not normal. Nothing human moves like that. I froze, completely locked up. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I just stood there watching this thing disappear into the trees on the other side. The silhouette was unmistakable. Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, but there's no other way to describe it. Massive, bipedal, covered in what looked like dark fur, and those arms, those impossibly long arms. Just as it vanished into the trees, a truck came barreling down the road from behind me. The headlights lit up the fog, and for a split second I thought I saw movement on the other side of the road, but the truck passed too quickly. The sound of the engine faded, and I was alone again. I stood there for what felt like forever, debating what to do. Turn back to town? Keep going? I realized I was already halfway home. Going forward would actually be quicker than going back. Plus, if that thing was between me and town, turning around might just bring me closer to it. I did a mental inventory of what I had for protection. My phone with a dying battery, my backpack, and 2 lighters in my pocket. I smoke occasionally. Don't tell my parents. Not exactly weapons, but I figured if it came after me, I could flick both lighters and scream as loud as possible. Fire and noise might scare it off. It was a desperate plan, but it was all I had. So I kept walking, my hands in my pockets, fingers wrapped around those lighters like they were the most powerful weapons on earth. Each step felt like I was moving through molasses. The road seemed to stretch on forever. That's when I heard it. Cracking sounds in the bushes to my left. Not constant, but intermittent. Crack. Silence. Crack. Silence. I stopped walking, and the sounds stopped too. I started walking again, and after a few seconds, the cracking resumed. It was matching my pace, staying parallel to me in the woods. It was following me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to keep my breathing quiet, but the cold air made each exhale visible in front of me. I slowed my pace, trying to listen more carefully to the movements in the forest. When I walked, it walked. When I stopped, it stopped. It was stalking me, staying just out of sight in the tree line. I picked up my pace slightly, and the cracking sounds increased in frequency. It was definitely keeping pace with me. I started formulating a new plan. The next time a vehicle came by, I would sprint toward it and try to flag it down. As if on cue, I saw headlights approaching from behind. I started waving my arms frantically and moved to the center of the road. The truck slowed slightly as it approached, probably confused by the sight of some kid frantically waving in the middle of nowhere, but it didn't stop. It swerved around me and continued on. I screamed after it, but the sound of the engine drowned me out. The moment the truck passed, the cracking in the woods started again, but louder this time, closer. Whatever was following me had used the noise of the truck to move nearer. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. For what, I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. I picked up my pace again, almost jogging now. The sounds in the forest matched my speed. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps, forming little clouds in the cold air. I was maybe 3 kilometers from home, but it felt like 300. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low, rumbling sound from the trees. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan, but something in between, something that no known animal in Manitoba makes. I've been hiking and camping my whole life, and I've heard wolves, bears, moose. This wasn't like any of them. It was deeper, more guttural, almost human-like, but not quite. Another set of headlights appeared in the distance, coming toward me this time. Again, I moved to the center of the road and waved my arms desperately. This was a bigger truck, a semi, and it slowed down more than the first vehicle had, but ultimately it too drove around me. The driver probably thought I was some drunk kid or prankster. As the truck passed, its headlights swept across the tree line, and I swear I saw movement. Something large shifting behind the trees, ducking lower as the light passed over it. I was crying now, tears freezing on my cheeks. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely walk, but I kept going. I had to get home. I couldn't let this thing, whatever it was, catch me on this road. The cracking sounds continued, sometimes fading slightly, sometimes getting louder. It seemed to be circling, moving further into the woods and then back toward the road. I kept my eyes locked on the tree line, trying to spot any movement, any shadow that didn't belong. Then I saw it again. Not the whole creature this time, just a glimpse, an impossibly long arm pushing aside a branch. It was about 20 feet into the woods, partially obscured by trees and fog, but unmistakable. The arm was covered in dark fur and ended in what looked like a massive hand. It wasn't a bear standing up. It wasn't a moose. It was something else entirely. I broke into a run. I couldn't help it. Every instinct was screaming at me to flee. The sounds in the forest immediately picked up pace, matching my speed. It was running parallel to me, keeping up effortlessly. I could hear branches snapping and undergrowth being crushed as it moved. A third vehicle approached from behind, and this was my last chance. I was about a kilometer from home now. I stopped dead in the middle of the road, waving both arms and screaming at the top of my lungs. It was a pickup truck, and it slowed considerably. For a moment, I thought it would stop, but then it accelerated around me. As it passed, I saw the driver's face. He looked scared, probably thinking I was going to rob him or something. As the truck's taillights disappeared around a bend, I heard something that will haunt me forever, a loud crash from the woods, like something massive had fallen or jumped, followed by heavy footsteps. Not in the forest anymore, on the road, behind me. I didn't look back. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. My backpack bounced painfully against my spine, and my lungs burned in the cold air, but I didn't slow down. I could hear the footsteps behind me, heavy but quick, gaining on me. Home was so close now. I could see the faint glow of our porch light through the trees, just a little further. I pushed harder, my legs burning, my chest on fire. The footsteps behind me suddenly stopped. For a second, I thought it had given up. But then I heard a different sound, something moving through the trees again, but faster this time, overtaking me. It was cutting through the forest, trying to get ahead of me. I reached the turnoff to our driveway just as I heard crashing in the trees directly to my right. I didn't stop. I sprinted down our long gravel driveway, fumbling for my keys with frozen fingers. I could hear movement in the woods that line our property, parallel to me again. I reached our front door, jammed the key in the lock, and practically fell inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then ran through the house, locking every door and window, closing all the blinds. I collapsed on the living room floor, gasping for breath, sobbing uncontrollably. For the next hour, I sat in silence, listening. Occasionally, I heard sounds outside, cracking twigs, rustling leaves. At one point, something heavy walked across our front porch. The wood creaked under its weight. I held my breath, clutching a kitchen knife I'd grabbed, but whatever it was didn't try to get in. Eventually, the sounds faded. I didn't tell my parents when they got home. What would I say? That Bigfoot followed me home. They'd think I was crazy. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept replaying everything in my mind, questioning what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a bear. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me in the fog. But 2 days later, Mrs. Peterson, my biology teacher, mentioned something during class that made my blood freeze. She'd been walking her dog the night before in the same area, and she'd seen something in the woods, something large with long arms and legs, moving in a way that no animal should move. She'd grabbed her dog and ran back to her car. I stayed after class and told her what happened to me. The look on her face as I described what I'd seen, I'll never forget it. Pure recognition. She'd seen the same thing. I don't walk home from night class anymore. Mom adjusted her schedule to pick me up. I haven't gone back to that stretch of road after dark, and I don't plan to. Whatever I saw that night, whatever followed me, it's still out there. And sometimes when I look out my bedroom window at night, toward the dark line of trees at the edge of our property, I swear I can see something watching, waiting. I think about that night a lot, trying to make sense of it. My best guess is that when it first crossed the road, it didn't notice me because of the combination of the truck headlights, the fog, and the wind blowing my scent away from it. But after that truck passed and the wind shifted, it caught my scent, and it got curious. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't made it home when I did. I don't want to know. All I know is that I saw something that night that shouldn't exist, and yet it does. And it's out there, in those woods, watching people walk that lonely road. Story 6. I've debated for years whether to share this. Even now, typing this out makes my hands a bit shaky. I'm not the type of guy who believes in monsters or fairy tales. I'm just a regular fisherman from Manitoba who had something happen to me that I can't explain. Not with science, not with logic, nothing. It was June 8th, 2000. I remember the date because my buddy Pete had just had his birthday the day before, and I'd decided to treat myself to a solo fishing trip out to Duck Mountain Provincial Park instead of nursing a hangover like the rest of his party guests. I'd packed my gear the night before, my favorite rod, a Shimano that had served me well for 7 years, a tackle box with all the usual suspects, and enough sandwiches and beer to last me through the day. The drive to Duck Mountain was peaceful. I had the windows down, country radio playing softly, and that perfect early summer weather that makes Manitoba one of the most beautiful places on earth when it wants to be. Not too hot, not cold, just right. The kind of day that makes you glad to be alive and outdoors. I arrived at 2 Mile Lake around 3 p.m. The park wasn't crowded. It was a Thursday after all. Just a few other cars in the lot, probably other fishermen who had the same idea as me. I remember walking down to scout the lake before even grabbing my gear, just to check the conditions. The water was clear and calm, like glass, with that deep blue-green tint that tells you it's healthy. Perfect visibility. You could see fish moving beneath the surface if you stared long enough. I set up on the eastern dock. It's a simple wooden structure, nothing fancy, but it juts out far enough to access deeper water without needing a boat. I've caught some decent walleye from that spot before. I unpacked my gear, cracked open my first beer, just one, I swear, I was driving later, and settled in for what I thought would be a normal evening of fishing. The first few hours were uneventful. I caught 2 decent-sized walleye and a smaller pike, which I released. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, but it was still bright out, one of those long summer evenings where the light hangs around forever. I checked my watch at one point, about 7 p.m., and decided I'd give it another hour before packing up. That's when everything changed. I was rebaiting my hook when I heard splashing to my right. Not the normal splashing of a fish jumping or a duck landing. This was rhythmic, heavy, like something big moving through water. My first thought was maybe a moose or deer crossing between the lakes. There's a channel that connects 2 Mile Lake to another smaller body of water. That wouldn't be unusual in these parts. I looked up casually, expecting to see wildlife. What I saw instead froze me to my core. About 150 yards away, where the channel narrows between the lakes, was a figure. A large, bipedal figure, walking upright through the water. My brain immediately tried to make sense of it. A hiker maybe, someone in waders crossing between the lakes. But even as I had that thought, I knew it made no sense. No one would try crossing there. The channel is notorious for its deep, sticky mud. Locals joke that it's where boots go to die. Yet this thing was moving through it with no trouble at all. Smooth, powerful strides. 4, maybe 5 steps total to cross an area that would have a human waist-deep in mud and struggling. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the sun was playing tricks on my eyes. But when I focused again, the figure was still there, now climbing up the opposite bank. That's when I got my clearest look at it. It was tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing had at least 2 feet on me, maybe more. Covered in dark hair, not quite black, but a deep, rich brown. The hair wasn't shaggy like you see in those blurry photos, but more like a short, dense coat. Its arms swung at its sides in a distinctly human-like way, but there was something different about the gait. Fluid, powerful, efficient, like an Olympic athlete compared to a weekend jogger. The proportions were all wrong for a human. The shoulders were massive, not bodybuilder broad, but naturally impossibly wide. The neck seemed almost non-existent, the head sitting directly on those shoulders. And I could see muscles moving under that hair, not like someone in a costume, but like an actual living being. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My fishing rod was frozen in my hands, the hook dangling forgotten with its fresh bait. Part of me wanted to call out, to see if it would react, but some primal instinct kept me silent. This wasn't something I should draw attention to. The creature paused at the top of the bank. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought it was going to turn toward me. But it didn't. It just stood there for maybe 3 seconds, its back to me, before continuing into the tree line with that same purposeful stride. And then it was gone. Just like that. No dramatic exit, no looking back, just disappeared into the forest as casually as someone walking into their own house. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My palms were sweaty, despite the cool evening air. The fishing rod in my hands suddenly seemed absurdly small and useless. What did I just see? I've spent my whole life in Manitoba. I know what bears look like when they stand on their hind legs. I know what a person in dark clothing looks like from a distance. This was neither. This was something else entirely. My logical brain started working overtime. Maybe it was some kind of prank. A guy in a suit. But who would wear a suit like that in June, trudging through mud and water? And how could anyone move through that channel so effortlessly? I've tried crossing it myself years ago and nearly lost my boots in the process. No human could have moved through that water the way this thing did. No way. I don't know how long I sat there trying to process what I'd seen. Eventually, I became aware that the sun was getting lower, and a primal part of my brain started screaming that I didn't want to be there when darkness fell. I packed up my gear in record time, hands still shaking. I kept looking over my shoulder toward the spot where the creature had disappeared. The walk back to my truck felt like miles instead of yards. Every snap of a twig made me jump. Every rustle of leaves had me spinning around. I kept feeling like something was watching me, following me, but I never saw anything. I threw my gear in the back of my truck and got the hell out of there. I didn't even secure my tackle box properly, just tossed everything in and left. The drive home is mostly a blur. I remember stopping at a gas station about 30 miles from the park and just sitting in my truck, trying to get my breathing under control. The attendant asked if I was okay when I went in to pay. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I had. When I got home, I poured myself a stiff whiskey and sat at my kitchen table. I've never been a spiritual guy, never believed in things I couldn't see or touch or explain. I'd always rolled my eyes at Sasquatch stories. They were campfire tales, myths, products of overactive imaginations or deliberate hoaxes. But I couldn't deny what I'd seen with my own two eyes, in broad daylight, with perfect visibility. No mistaking it, no misinterpreting it. I saw a Sasquatch, a goddamn Sasquatch, walking through water in Duck Mountain Provincial Park on a Thursday evening in June. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. What would I say? Hey, guess what I saw while fishing? Bigfoot! Yeah, right. Everyone would think I was crazy or pulling their leg, so I kept it to myself, turning it over and over in my mind, examining the memory from every angle, trying to find some rational explanation. I couldn't find one. Still can't. I did go back to Duck Mountain about a month later. I don't know what I was expecting. To see it again, to find tracks, to prove to myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. The channel looked the same. The mud was still there, still deep and treacherous. I tried crossing it myself, just to see if maybe I'd misjudged how difficult it was. I sank up to my knees in seconds and had to struggle back to solid ground. There's no way a person could have strode through it the way that creature did. That was 13 years ago now. I've never seen anything like it again, though I've gone back to that same spot dozens of times over the years. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, if maybe the sun and a beer played tricks on my eyes. But then I remember the clarity of that moment, the water droplets flying from its legs as it walked, the way muscles moved under hair, the absolute confidence in its movement. I know what I saw, and it has changed me forever. I'm still not the kind of guy who believes in the paranormal. I don't think aliens are probing farmers, or that ghosts are rattling chains in old houses. But I do believe there's something living in the remote wilderness of Manitoba. Something large, powerful, and very good at not being seen. Something that most people dismiss as legend or folklore. I was one of those people once, not anymore. I finally decided to report my sighting to Sasquatch Canada earlier this year, in April. I don't know what made me do it after all this time. Maybe I just wanted it on record somewhere. Maybe I wanted validation that others have seen similar things. Maybe I just needed to tell someone, even strangers, what happened to me that day. So that's my story. It happened exactly as I've described it. One moment I was a normal guy fishing on a dock, and the next moment my entire understanding of the world changed forever. I've never told many people about this, just my wife and my closest friend. They believe me, or at least they believe that I believe it. That's enough, I guess. But I know what I saw crossing that channel on June 8th, 2000. I know it was real. And sometimes, when I'm fishing alone on quiet lakes in Manitoba, I scan the shoreline more carefully than I used to. Not out of fear, exactly. More like awareness. Because now I know we're not always alone out there in the wilderness. Sometimes, something is watching from the trees. Something that walks like a man, but isn't one. Something that can move through impossible terrain as easily as we walk across a living room. And if you're ever fishing at Duck Mountain, keep your eyes on that channel between the lakes. You probably won't see anything unusual, but then again, you might. Story 7. I've never told this to many people because I know how it sounds. But I swear what I'm about to share is exactly what happened that night in August 2011. It's been over a decade now, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My cousin Daryl and I were both 16 at the time. We'd grown up on the outskirts of Waterhand, Manitoba, hunting and fishing since we were old enough to walk. Our dads and grandfathers taught us everything about the woods, tracking, hunting, survival skills, all the traditional knowledge passed down through generations. By 16, we were experienced outdoorsmen, comfortable in the wilderness in ways most kids our age weren't. That particular night, we decided to go spotlighting for deer along the eastern tree line of Old Man Peterson's field. It wasn't exactly legal, but it was something a lot of local kids did. Peterson never minded much as long as we were respectful of his property and didn't leave a mess. The field bordered a dense stretch of forest that ran for miles, untouched and wild. We'd borrowed my uncle's truck and headed out around 10 p.m. when it was good and dark. The night was warm for August in Manitoba, maybe around 60 degrees, with just a slight breeze rustling the tall grass. The sky was clear, stars everywhere, just a sliver of moon. Perfect conditions for spotlighting, dark enough that deer wouldn't see us coming, but good visibility with our equipment. I remember everything about that night so clearly. I was wearing my dad's old canvas jacket, had my lucky red cap on, and carried my Remington 870 shotgun loaded with slugs. Darrell had the spotlight, one of those high-powered ones that can illuminate a tree line from 300 yards away. We were prepared for deer, maybe the occasional coyote. Nothing else. We'd been out for about an hour, slowly driving along the edge of the field with the headlights off, just creeping along with the windows down. The only sounds were the soft crunch of tires on dirt, crickets chirping, and the occasional hoot of an owl. Normal night sounds we'd heard 1,000 times before. Darrell was manning the spotlight, sweeping it methodically across the tree line, looking for the telltale reflection of deer eyes. We'd spotted a few does earlier, but nothing worth stopping for. We were hoping for a buck, though it was really more about just being out there than actually bringing something home. It was close to 11:30 when we reached the northern edge of the field where the trees got thicker. There was this one spot where a lightning strike had taken down a massive oak a few years back, creating a kind of natural clearing. We stopped there to stretch our legs and have a smoke. I remember checking my phone, no service as usual out there, and noticing the time, 11:27 p.m. That detail stuck with me because everything changed exactly 2 minutes later. We were leaning against the truck, just bullshitting about school starting in a couple weeks, when we both heard it. A growl. But not like any animal growl I'd ever heard before, and trust me, I'd heard plenty. Wolves, bears, cougars, you name it. This was different. It was deep, rumbling, almost deliberate. Like whatever made that sound wanted us to hear it. I felt the hair on my arms stand up instantly. Darrell and I froze, not even breathing. We locked eyes for a second, and I could see he was thinking the same thing I was. That wasn't normal. "What the fuck was that?" Darrell whispered, already reaching for the spotlight we'd set on the hood of the truck. "I don't know," I said, instinctively grabbing my shotgun from the truck bed. "Sounded big." The growl came again, this time from closer to the fallen oak, maybe 50 yards away at most. It was so deep it seemed to vibrate in my chest. Darrell flicked on the spotlight and swung it toward the sound. For a second there was nothing, just trees, underbrush, the old fallen oak. Then the light caught something moving. At first my brain tried to process it as a bear. That would make sense, right? Black bears aren't uncommon in Manitoba. But this wasn't a bear, not even close. The creature had its back to us when the light hit it. It was standing upright, and my first clear thought was how fucking tall it was. Maybe 7-8 feet? Hard to tell exactly from that distance. It was covered in dark hair, a mix of dark brown and black, thickest around its head and shoulders, somewhat thinner but still visible on its lower body. I could clearly see massive shoulders that tapered to a narrower waist, and visible calves beneath what looked like shorter hair on its legs. The moment our light hit it, the thing turned its head slightly, not enough for us to see its face, but enough to know it was aware of us. Then it just started walking away. Not running, not charging, just walking, but its pace was unnervingly fast, covering ground quicker than any human could at a walk. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. "Holy shit," Darrell whispered beside me, his hand shaking so badly the spotlight beam wobbled across the trees. "Is that a—" "Sasquatch," I finished, the word feeling strange in my mouth. I'd heard stories my whole life. Everyone growing up in rural Manitoba has, but I'd never believed them, not really. Without thinking, I chambered a round in my shotgun. The sound was loud in the quiet night, and I saw the creature's stride falter for just a second before continuing. I raised the gun, lining up the sight on the creature's back. My finger was on the trigger, muscle memory from years of hunting taking over. But something stopped me. I couldn't pull it. Not fear, though I was terrified, but something else. Looking at that being through my sights, I knew with absolute certainty that I shouldn't shoot it, that a slug would be useless anyway. It would just bounce off. I can't explain how I knew that, but I did. I lowered the gun slightly, still watching through the scope as the creature moved. The light from Daryl's spotlight was fading as the Sasquatch got farther away, but I could still make out details. Its gait was smooth but fast, much faster than that famous Patterson-Gimlin footage I'd seen on TV. This thing could move, covering ground with long, purposeful strides. "Should we follow it?" Daryl asked, his voice higher than normal. "Are you fucking crazy?" I replied, though part of me wanted to. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. The creature reached the denser part of the forest and disappeared from view, the spotlight no longer able to penetrate that far into the trees. Daryl kept the light trained on that spot for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. "Did you see that? Did you fucking see that?" he kept saying over and over. "Yeah," I said, suddenly aware that my legs were shaking. I leaned against the truck for support. That wasn't a bear. No shit, it wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk away on two legs like that. We stayed frozen by the truck for several minutes, both of us scanning the tree line, jumping at every little sound. The night suddenly felt different, charged somehow, like we were being watched. "We should go," I finally said, my mouth dry. "Yeah," Daryl agreed, not taking his eyes off the trees. "Yeah, let's go." We practically dove into the truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As soon as the engine roared to life, I flipped on the high beams, illuminating the tree line one last time. Nothing. I threw the truck into drive and we tore out of there, not caring about being quiet anymore. We didn't speak the entire 20-minute drive back to town. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd seen, and we both knew no one would believe us. The next day, we tried to talk about it, to process what had happened. We compared details, making sure we'd both seen the same thing. We had. "How big do you think it was?" I asked Daryl as we sat on his porch, both of us exhausted from a sleepless night. He thought about it for a moment, then said simply, "Bigger than me." Coming from Daryl, who stood 6'2" and weighed about 220 pounds, that said a lot. We debated telling others, our dads maybe, but we knew how it would sound. Two teenagers out spotlighting, which we weren't supposed to be doing anyway, claim they saw Bigfoot. Yeah, right. We'd be laughed out of town, so we kept it to ourselves. For over a year, we didn't tell anyone, but the experience changed us. We still hunted, still went into those woods, but never alone. And never at night, if we could help it. And we always felt like we were being watched. It wasn't until November 2012 that we finally told someone. Daryl had found this website, Sasquatch Canada, where people reported their encounters. The stories there sounded so similar to ours that we finally felt like maybe, just maybe, we weren't crazy. Maybe what we saw was real. I still think about that night all the time, about what would have happened if I'd pulled the trigger, if the creature had turned around fully and we'd seen its face, if we'd followed it into the woods. Sometimes when I'm alone in the forest now, even in broad daylight, I'll hear a twig snap or leaves rustle, and I'll freeze, waiting for that deep growl. It hasn't come again. Not yet. But I know what's out there now. I know there are things in the wilderness of Manitoba that can't be explained. I've seen countless bears since that night. Moose, elk, all kinds of wildlife. Nothing moves like what we saw. Nothing has that presence. The way it deliberately turned its back to us before walking away, like it was choosing not to engage, has always stuck with me. Like it was showing restraint. I still hunt in those woods. Still love being outdoors, but now I understand why our ancestors had such respect for the forest and its secrets. Some things out there aren't meant to be understood, just respected. And whatever we saw that night, that Sasquatch, deserves that respect. So that's my story. I don't care if anyone believes me or not. Daryl and I know what we saw. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers seeing us too. Story 8. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that morning in 2007. It's been years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was 14, in 9th grade at St. Anne's High. Me, Kyle, Mikey and Jared had this stupid idea to go hiking before school one morning in early October. We were into that kind of stuff back then, exploring the woods, building forts, typical teenage boy things. It was Jared's idea to go before dawn. He said the woods looked different in the early morning light, more mystical or whatever. We all agreed because, honestly, it sounded cool and a little dangerous, which was exactly what we wanted at that age. We met up at the edge of Willow Creek Trail around 5:45 a.m. It was still completely dark out, and way colder than I expected. I remember my breath making little clouds in front of my face as I waited for the others to show up. I was wearing my dad's old Edmonton Oilers hoodie that was way too big for me and some worn-out jeans. My flashlight kept flickering. The batteries were almost dead because I'd forgotten to change them after our last night adventure. Kyle showed up first, then Mikey, and finally Jared. We were all half asleep, huddled together at the trailhead, trying to wake up. The fog was so thick that morning. It hung between the trees like something alive, swirling around our ankles as we walked. The whole forest was dead quiet, except for our footsteps and whispers. "Dude, I think I saw something move over there," Mikey kept saying, pointing into the darkness between the trees. We all told him to shut up. Mikey was always trying to freak us out. We'd been hiking for about 20 minutes when the sky started changing from black to a deep, murky blue. Not quite daylight yet, but enough to see a few feet ahead without the flashlights. The fog wasn't helping, though. It seemed to get thicker as the light grew, like it was pushing back against the morning. The woods around St. Anne's aren't particularly special, just typical Manitoba forest with pine trees, birch and thick underbrush. But that morning something felt off. I can't explain it exactly. It was like the forest was holding its breath. We were following this narrow trail that cuts through a section of denser woods. Tall pines on either side, the ground covered in old pine needles and dead leaves that crunched under our feet. We were talking about normal stuff, homework, this girl Jared liked, the hockey game from the night before. Normal things. Then we all stopped talking at the same time. It's weird how that happens sometimes, like everyone picks up on something subconsciously before you consciously notice it. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. "Do you guys hear that?" Kyle whispered. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then I did. Crunching leaves, but not like an animal moving through brush. It was heavy, deliberate, slow, and it was coming from behind us. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. We all turned around at the same time. The fog swirled between the trees about 30 feet back, and for a second I couldn't see anything. Then the fog shifted, and I saw it. I've spent years trying to make sense of what I saw that morning. I've looked at pictures of bears standing on their hind legs. I've considered the possibility it was some guy in a costume, or that my mind was playing tricks in the low light. But none of those explanations fit what we all saw. It was massive, taller than anything I'd ever seen before, 9, maybe 10 feet tall, standing upright on 2 legs. The proportions were all wrong for it to be a person. Its arms hung too low, its shoulders were too broad. It was just a dark shape in the fog, but I could make out the outline clearly enough. It was covered in what looked like dark fur, but in that light with the fog, I couldn't tell you what color exactly. Just dark. The thing, and I don't know what else to call it, was crossing the path behind us, moving from one side of the forest to the other. It wasn't running or even walking fast, just taking these huge, deliberate steps. Its head turned slightly in our direction as it crossed, and I swear I felt it looking at us, even though I couldn't make out any facial features in the dim light. And then it was gone, disappearing into the trees on the other side of the path. For what felt like forever, none of us moved or said anything. We just stood there, staring at the spot where it had been. I remember the sound of my heart pounding in my ears, my mouth completely dry. My legs felt like they were locked in place. Mikey broke first. "What the fuck was that?" he whispered, his voice cracking. That was all it took. Suddenly we were all running. I don't think I've ever run that fast before or since. My lungs were burning, branches were scraping my face, and I kept slipping on the wet leaves, but I didn't slow down. None of us did. We just ran full speed back toward the trailhead, toward the road, toward anything that wasn't those woods. I remember looking back once while running and seeing nothing but trees and fog, but I could have sworn I heard something moving parallel to us, just out of sight, keeping pace. We didn't stop running until we reached Kyle's house, which was closest to the trail. We burst through his back door, startling his mom, who was making coffee in the kitchen. We were all out of breath, sweating despite the cold, with scratches on our faces and hands from branches we'd run into. "What happened to you boys?" Kyle's mom asked, looking genuinely concerned. We looked at each other, and I realized we didn't have an answer ready. What could we say? We saw a monster in the woods. Even in that moment, with the fear still fresh, I knew how that would sound. "Thought we saw a bear," Kyle said finally. His mom seemed to accept this, muttering something about being more careful and telling us to clean ourselves up before school. In the bathroom, the four of us huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. "That wasn't a bear," Jared said, his face still pale. "Bears don't stand like that." "It was too tall," I agreed. "Way too tall." "Did you see how it moved?" Mikey asked. "So smooth, like it was floating." We spent the next hour at Kyle's house, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. At first, we just called it the monster, or that thing. It was Jared who first said the word out loud. "I think it was a Sasquatch," he said quietly. We all looked at him and no one laughed or dismissed it, because deep down, I think we'd all been thinking the same thing. The more we talked about it, comparing what each of us had seen, the more certain we became. The height, the way it moved, the dark fur. It all fit with the stories we'd heard about Bigfoot or Sasquatch. By the time we left for school, we'd all agreed. We had seen a Sasquatch in the woods near St. Anne's. School that day was surreal. We moved through the hallways like zombies, barely paying attention in class. The four of us sat together at lunch, still talking in hushed voices about what we'd seen. We made a pact not to tell anyone else, at least not yet. Who would believe us anyway? But the secret was hard to keep. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark shape moving through the fog. I kept hearing noises outside my window, probably just the wind or neighborhood cats, but my mind turned every sound into footsteps, heavy footsteps. The next day at school, I noticed Kyle had dark circles under his eyes too. None of us had slept well. Over the next few weeks, we went back and forth between wanting to tell everyone and wanting to forget it ever happened. We researched Sasquatch sightings online, staying up late reading accounts from people who claimed to have seen similar creatures. But there was nothing from our area. St. Anne's wasn't known for Sasquatch sightings. That made us even more hesitant to share our story. Eventually, we did tell a few people. My cousin who was visiting from Winnipeg, a teacher who seemed more open-minded than most, a group of kids at a party when we were a bit drunk and feeling brave. The reactions were always the same: initial interest followed by disbelief, sometimes mockery. So we stopped talking about it to others. But we never stopped talking about it among ourselves. Even years later, when we'd meet up during breaks from college, the conversation would eventually turn to that morning. We'd analyze it again and again, trying to find an explanation that made sense. We never did. The weird thing is, our memories of it never changed or contradicted each other. You'd think over time, with all the retellings, our stories would diverge. But they didn't. We all remembered the same details. The height, 9 to 10 feet. The dark color, the way it moved, the complete silence of the forest. When Kyle's dad, who didn't believe us but was curious, questioned us separately about what we'd seen, our descriptions matched almost perfectly. I'm 30 now. I haven't been back to those woods since high school. I moved to Winnipeg after graduation, then Toronto for work. Kyle and Jared still live in Manitoba, and Mikey's somewhere in British Columbia. We keep in touch through social media, but we don't see each other often. Last year, though, we all met up in Winnipeg for Kyle's wedding. The night before, we went out for drinks, just the 4 of us. After a few beers, Jared brought it up. "Do you guys ever think about that morning?" he asked. We all knew exactly what he was talking about. "All the time," Mikey admitted. "I still have dreams about it." "Me too," I said. "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, and I swear I can hear those footsteps." Kyle was quiet for a moment. "I drive past those woods every day on my way to work," he said finally. "I've never seen anything else. But sometimes, especially on foggy mornings, I get this feeling, like something's watching from between the trees." We sat in silence for a while after that, each lost in our own thoughts. I think we all wanted to ask the same question. Should we go back? See if it's still there? But none of us had the courage to suggest it. The thing is, I know what I saw that day. We all do. It wasn't a bear, or a moose, or a guy in a costume. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist, but does. And it's still out there, somewhere in those woods. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has seen it since we did, if there are other reports from St. Anne's that I haven't come across, or if it was somehow meant just for us, a glimpse of something that few people ever get to see. I don't expect anyone reading this to believe me. I wouldn't if I hadn't seen it myself, but I needed to write it down, to share it somewhere, because even after all these years, I still find myself thinking about that dark shape moving through the fog, crossing our path with those deliberate heavy steps. And I wonder if, somewhere in those woods, it remembers us too. Story 9. I've never been able to shake what happened that summer day, August 18th, 2012. The date is burned into my memory because it changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I was 11 years old, camping with my family at Stephen Field Campground in Manitoba. We'd been coming to this same seasonal campsite for years, but this trip was different. That morning, my friend Blaze, we've been friends since kindergarten, and I were hanging out with my little sister Maya and her friend Eva, both 7 years old. Our parents were back at the campsite getting lunch ready, and we were bored, just wandering around near our camp. It was around 11 a.m. when we spotted a group of white-tailed deer across the road from our campsite. They were feeding in this small clearing that was partially visible from where we stood. We watched them for a while, mesmerized by how close they were. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them, including a couple of fawns. After about 10 minutes, something spooked them and they scattered, disappearing into the thick bush. Being kids with nothing better to do, we decided to check out what the deer had been so interested in. Our parents had always told us not to wander too far, but the clearing was just across the road, maybe 50 yards from our campsite. We could still hear our parents talking and the radio playing. When we got to the clearing, we found what had attracted the deer. Someone had left apples scattered around, and there was this salt lick block that had been partially eaten. It wasn't unusual to see this kind of stuff. Local hunters would sometimes leave bait to attract deer. While we were poking around the clearing, Maya pointed out a rough grouse hen with some tiny chicks scurrying around in the bushes at the edge of the clearing. We all went quiet, trying not to scare them away. The mama bird was making these soft clucking sounds to her babies. It was pretty cool. That's when I noticed movement deeper in the bush, maybe 15-20 feet beyond the grouse. At first, I thought it was just shadows from the leaves moving in the breeze, but then I realized something was actually there, something big. "What is that?" I whispered to Blaze, who was standing a few feet away from me. He squinted into the bush and said, "I don't know. Maybe it's a Bigfoot." He said it like a joke, but his voice cracked a little. I expected to see a bear or maybe a moose when I looked more carefully. What I saw instead made my skin break out in goosebumps. Through the gaps in the leaves and branches, I could make out a massive figure. It wasn't standing upright, but was kind of hunched forward, with its arms hanging down by its sides. Even in that position, it had to be over 6 feet tall. The thing that struck me most was how still it was. It wasn't moving at all except for its eyes. Those eyes. Maya was standing closest to it, and even though she was only 7, she seemed transfixed. Later, she would give the most detailed description of all of us. What freaked me out the most was the realization that it was watching us. It wasn't just some animal that happened to be there. It was deliberately staying still, like it thought we couldn't see it if it didn't move. But we could all see it. All 4 of us were looking right at it, and it was looking back. The creature was covered in dark brown, almost black hair. It wasn't like a bear's fur. It was longer, maybe 3 inches long, and it hung from its arms. Where the hair parted or was thinner, you could see dark skin underneath. Its head was massive compared to a human's, and its face had less hair than the rest of its body. The skin on its face was dark, almost like it had been in the sun too long. But those eyes, I'll never forget those eyes. They were dark green with white around the edges, and they moved back and forth, scanning all 4 of us. There was intelligence in those eyes. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was hiding, watching, waiting. Its nose was what convinced me this wasn't a person in a costume. It was sort of human-like, but flatter and way wider at the bottom. No makeup or mask I'd ever seen looked that real or moved that naturally. We all stood frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. Then Eva let out this tiny whimper, and something in my brain finally screamed, "Run!" I grabbed Maya's hand, and we all bolted back toward our campsite. We burst into camp, all talking at once, out of breath and freaking out. My dad was flipping burgers on the portable grill, and my mum was setting the picnic table. "Whoa, whoa, one at a time," my dad said, looking more annoyed than concerned. "What's got you all worked up?" "We saw a Sasquatch," Maya blurted out. "It was hiding in the bushes watching us." My mum exchanged that "here we go again" look with my dad. They thought we were just playing make-believe or had seen a bear and let our imaginations run wild. "It wasn't a bear," I insisted, before they could say anything. "It had a face like a person, but not a person, and it was huge." Blaze nodded frantically. "It was standing up, but hunched over, and it had these creepy eyes that followed us." Eva was crying by this point, and my parents shifted from amused to concerned. My dad put down his spatula and knelt to our level. "Where exactly did you see this?" he asked in that serious voice adults use when they're humoring you but still think you're being ridiculous. We all pointed across the road to the clearing where we'd been. My dad sighed, grabbed a flashlight, even though it was the middle of the day, and told my mom to stay with us while he checked it out. My mom tried to calm us down while we waited, but we were all on edge. When my dad came back 15 minutes later, he said he hadn't seen anything unusual, just some deer tracks, the salt lick we'd mentioned, and trampled vegetation where we'd been playing. He suggested it might have been a black bear standing on its hind legs, which apparently they do sometimes when they're curious or trying to get a better look at something. But we knew what we'd seen. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't have flat, wide noses and green eyes. They don't have that intelligent, calculating look. They don't stand perfectly still, trying to blend in with the foliage. The weird thing was, even though our parents dismissed our story, all four of us saw the exact same thing. And not just the general outline or idea of a creature, we all described the same specific details, even though we were standing in different spots. Maya and Eva could barely agree on what cartoon to watch most days, but they described the same creature down to the color of its eyes and the length of its hair. That night in our tent, Maya couldn't sleep. She kept whispering to me, asking if I thought the Bigfoot was still out there watching us. I told her no to make her feel better, but I kept waking up all night, listening for sounds outside our tent. The next day, we avoided the clearing and stayed close to camp, but I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting to see those green eyes staring back at me. When we got home from the camping trip, I tried to research Sasquatch sightings in Manitoba. My parents didn't have those parental controls on our computer yet, so I was able to look up whatever I wanted. I found out that there had been other reports in that general area. People finding weird tracks in the snow, hearing strange howls near a cabin in Lavenham, which isn't far from where we were camping. What's crazy is that even now, years later, all four of us remember the encounter the same way. Maya and Eva live in different cities now. Eva moved to Winnipeg with her family the year after our camping trip. Blaze and I still hang out sometimes, but we don't talk about that day much. It's like we're afraid that if we pick it apart too much, we'll start doubting what we saw. But when the topic does come up, none of our stories have changed, not one detail. About 6 months after it happened, my mom was watching this old movie called Harry and the Hendersons with Maya and me. It's about a family that hits a Sasquatch with their car and brings it home. When the Sasquatch character appeared on screen, Maya immediately said, "Oh no, that is fake. The one I saw looked different." She wasn't trying to convince anyone, she was just stating a fact. Another time, my mom was browsing online and came across some Sasquatch images. I think she was secretly looking into it, though she'd never admit it. She called Maya over to look at the pictures, probably expecting her to say they all looked like what she saw. But Maya pointed to specific ones and said, "That one is close," or "No, not like that one." She was being so particular about the details that it was hard to believe she was making it up. What bugs me most is that I know what I saw that day, but I can't prove it. No one else will ever believe us because we were just kids, and kids have wild imaginations, right? But I know the difference between imagination and reality. I've imagined plenty of monsters under my bed or in my closet, but I never actually saw them with my own eyes. That thing in the bushes was real. It was breathing. It was thinking. It was watching us with a calculated intelligence that still gives me chills. Sometimes I wonder if it watches other people too, hiding just out of clear sight, staying so still that most people don't notice it. How many people have walked right past one of these creatures without even knowing? I'm 22 now, and I still go camping, though never back to that same campground. Every time I'm in the woods, I find myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see those green eyes staring back at me. I don't tell many people about what happened. When I've tried, they get that look on their face, the one that says they think I'm either lying or was a kid with an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. All four of us do. Something was hiding in those bushes that day, something that shouldn't exist, according to science, but was right there in front of us. It was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, and it was watching us as intently as we were watching it. I sometimes wonder if it's still out there, if it has a family, a community, if it tells stories about the time it almost got spotted by 4 human children, if it learned to be more careful after our encounter. I know I'll probably never get answers to these questions, but I know what I saw, and no matter how many years pass or how many people don't believe me, Nothing will change what happened on August 18th, 2012, at Stephen Field Campground in Manitoba. The day I came face to face with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. Story 10. I never thought I'd be sharing this. For 14 years, I've kept what happened near Lewis River Road to myself. I'm 73 now, and I figure if I don't get this off my chest soon, I'll take it to my grave. Maybe some of you have experienced something similar and won't think I'm just another crazy old man. Back in 2009, I was visiting my good friend Darcy up in Vancouver. I'm Thomas, by the way. Lived most of my life in the Texas Hill Country, but I've always loved the Pacific Northwest. After spending a week with Darcy, I decided to stay a bit longer in the area and rented a small cabin near Ariel, Washington. Beautiful country out there, all those tall pines and firs, the mountains, and Lewis River cutting through. Peaceful, or so I thought. It was my third night staying at this little place owned by a lady named Tina. Nice enough woman, kept to herself mostly. Her house was about 50 yards from my cabin, both tucked into the edge of the forest. The cabin was simple, one room with a bathroom, small kitchenette, a bed, and a couple chairs. It had this little covered porch where I'd sit in the evenings. That night, I'll never forget it as long as I live, was clear and cool for June. Must have been around 10:30 p.m. I was sitting in my car, which was parked right beside the cabin. Sometimes I preferred sitting there instead of the porch because the car had better seats, and I could listen to the radio without disturbing Tina. I had the windows rolled down about halfway, enjoying a beer and listening to some old country music station. The night was so quiet, you could hear every little cricket and frog doing their thing. I remember taking a sip of my beer and looking up at the stars. You don't get stars like that in Texas. Not where I live anyway. Too much light pollution. Out there, though, you could see every speck of the Milky Way sprawled across the sky. I was just sitting there, appreciating the moment, when everything changed. First came the birds. Now, I know birds don't usually make noise at night unless something disturbs them, and boy, were they disturbed. It started with just a few, then erupted into this absolute chaos of bird screams from the forest about 200 yards away. Not chirping or singing, screaming, like they were terrified. I sat up straight, beer forgotten in my hand. The hairs on my arms stood up before my brain even processed why. Something was wrong, very wrong. Then came the howl. Folks, I've been hunting since I was 8 years old. I've heard bobcats, cougars, bears, coyotes, wolves, you name it. I've heard elk bugle and deer snort. But this wasn't like anything made by any animal I've ever encountered. It started low, like a deep rumble that you felt more than heard. Then it built and built and built, until it became this ungodly roar that I can only describe as somewhere between a really hungry lion and a very pissed-off T-Rex. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't have better words for it. It was primal and ancient and absolutely terrifying. But here's the part that really shook me, literally. As this roar reached its peak, I felt it physically go through my body, not just the sound hitting my ears, but something else. It was like waves of pressure moving through me, vibrating my bones and organs. My chest felt tight, my ears popped, and I got instantly dizzy. I now know this was infrasound, those low-frequency sound waves that some animals can produce that humans can't properly hear, but can definitely feel. The car windows were rattling, my vision blurred slightly, I couldn't move. It wasn't just fear that paralyzed me, though believe me, I was scared out of my mind. It was like whatever was making that sound had some kind of physical hold on me. The roar lasted maybe 15-20 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it finally peaked and stopped, the silence that followed was absolute. No crickets, no frogs, no birds, nothing. It was like every living thing in those woods was holding its breath along with me. I sat there, completely frozen, my knuckles white around my beer can, which I'd crushed without realizing it. Beer had spilled all over my pants, but I didn't care. My eyes were fixed on the tree line, straining to see through the darkness. That's when I heard it moving. Something big was crashing through the underbrush, not clumsy like a bear, but deliberate, powerful. I could hear branches snapping, not like they were being stepped on, but like they were being pushed aside. Whatever it was heading toward the small creek that ran through a ravine about 100 yards from the cabin. My car didn't have its lights on, and I was parked in the shadow of the cabin. I don't think it knew I was there, or if it did, it didn't care. I sure as hell wasn't going to announce my presence by starting the engine or turning on a light. As the sounds of movement faded toward the creek, I heard something else that still gives me chills when I think about it. Rocks, big ones, being smacked together down in that ravine. Smack, pause, smack, pause, smack, like it was sending some kind of signal. I don't know how long I sat there, barely breathing. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. Time sort of lost meaning. Eventually, I became aware that I was shaking uncontrollably. My t-shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. A light came on at Tina's house, and I saw her front door open. She stood there in the doorway for maybe 10 seconds, looking out into the night. Then she went back inside, closing the door firmly. That small, normal action somehow broke the spell I was under. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped out of my car and into the cabin, locking the door behind me. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening. The woods remained silent for the rest of the night. No more rocks, no more roaring. But no normal night sounds returned either. I didn't sleep a wink. When dawn finally broke, I peeked out the windows. Everything looked normal. Birds were singing again like nothing had happened. When I saw Tina later that morning, she was out watering some flowers. I walked over, still shaky, and asked if she'd heard anything strange during the night. "Like what?" she asked, not really looking at me. "Like a really loud animal sound, almost like a roar or a scream." She shrugged. "Probably just a cougar. They get real vocal sometimes." I knew damn well it wasn't a cougar, but I also knew the look on her face, that careful neutrality people put on when they think you're spouting nonsense, but are too polite to say so. "It sounded bigger than a cougar," I pressed. "Much bigger, like maybe a Sasquatch or something." The word felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth. Tina's face closed up completely. "Mr. Thomas, there's no such thing as Sasquatch. Probably just the wind playing tricks on you, or maybe a bear." And that was it. She turned away and went back to her watering. The conversation was over. I stayed one more night, couldn't get a refund, but I stayed inside with the doors locked and was on the road back to Texas by 6 a.m. the next morning. For years, I didn't tell a soul about what happened. Who would believe me? A 59-year-old man at the time, claiming to have heard a Sasquatch in the woods of Washington. I'd be laughed out of any room in Texas, but I've spent countless hours researching since then. I've learned that many Sasquatch reports mention that bone-rattling infrasound effect. Some theorize they use it to stun prey or ward off threats, which would explain why I felt so physically affected by it. The rock clacking has been reported too, as a way they communicate with each other over distances. I've never been back to Washington, despite how beautiful it is. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I'll hear that roar again in my mind, and I'll jolt awake, heart pounding like it's trying to escape my chest. I know what I experienced. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar, wasn't the wind. It was something that shouldn't exist according to science, but does. Something ancient and powerful that still calls the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest home. I've thought a lot about why Tina reacted the way she did. My guess is that she's heard or seen things herself living out there, but has learned to ignore them to keep her sanity. Or maybe the locals just don't talk about it, an unspoken agreement to pretend these things don't happen. I'm an old man now. I don't have much to gain by making up stories, but I needed to share this before I'm gone. That night changed how I see the world. There are things out there, in the dark spaces between civilization, that we've forgotten or chosen to ignore. Things that remind us that for all our technology and progress, we're still just visitors in many parts of this world. I've never felt so small, so vulnerable, as I did sitting in that car while something ancient and powerful announced its presence with a sound that went through my body like it was nothing. I don't know if it knew I was there. I don't know if it would have hurt me if it had found me. But I do know that whatever it wasn't just an animal. There was intelligence behind that sound, behind those clacking rocks. If you're ever up near Lewis River Road, near Ariel, Washington, and you find yourself out after dark, listen carefully. But if you hear the birds go silent all at once, get inside. And if you feel that deep vibration start to build in your chest before your ears can even register the sound, know that you're not alone out there, not by a long shot. Nasu Fi. Story 11. I've never told this story publicly before, but I need to get it off my chest. This isn't some made-up BS for internet points. This is my life, growing up in rural Georgia, on property that I'm now convinced is home to a family of Sasquatches. The first signs started when I was just a kid. My dad had this shop about 200 yards from our house, and I'd hear these weird rock-knocking sounds coming from the woods behind it. It was always a pattern, 3 distinct knocks, then silence, then sometimes an answer from deeper in the forest. At first, I thought it was just other kids playing in the woods, but it happened too often, even during school hours when no one should have been out there. My dad would brush it off whenever I mentioned it. Probably just a woodpecker, he'd say, but I'd been around woodpeckers my whole life. This was different. This was deliberate. As I got older, maybe around 8 or 9, I started noticing other things. We had these trails all through our property for riding ATVs, and sometimes we'd find trees placed across the paths. Not fallen trees from storms, these were deliberately placed there, sometimes stacked in weird configurations, even X patterns. My dad would just move them without comment, but I always felt like he knew more than he let on. The first time I had what I'd call a definitive encounter was when I was about 11. My dad had finally let me hunt by myself in this small stand about a half-mile from our house. It was deer season, and I was sitting there dead quiet for about 2 hours when I heard what sounded like someone walking through the leaves behind me, maybe 50 feet back. At first, I thought it was my dad checking on me, but then I heard what sounded like murmuring, like someone talking under their breath. But it wasn't words I could make out. It was this weird, deep, almost musical mumbling. The hairs on my neck stood up. I was afraid to turn around, just sat frozen with my rifle across my lap. The walking and mumbling continued for maybe 5 minutes, circling around behind my stand, never coming closer, but never moving away either. Then it just stopped. I sat there for another hour before I worked up the courage to climb down and sprint all the way home. When I told my dad, he got this look on his face I'd never seen before, not disbelief, but something else, concern maybe. All he said was, maybe you should stick to the stands closer to the house for a while. The weird thing is, the next summer my dad built a new deer stand about 300 yards deeper into the woods from where I'd had that experience. But when I asked if I could use it, he flat out refused. That one's not for you, he said. No explanation, nothing. And I never saw him use it either. Years passed. I had occasional weird experiences, finding unusual footprints that were way too big to be human, but didn't look like bear tracks either. Hearing strange calls at night that weren't coyotes or owls or anything I could identify. But I pushed it all down. Told myself I was being dramatic. Then came fall 2017. I was home from college, and I'd brought my roommate Kyle with me to hunt for the weekend. We were setting up in a stand about a quarter-mile from that forbidden stand my dad had built years before. It was just before dawn, that grey time when visibility is poor but you can still make out shapes. We were being quiet, getting settled, when we heard it. A roar that literally shook my chest cavity. It wasn't a bear or a hog or anything I'd ever heard before. It was deep and powerful and unmistakably primal. Kyle looked at me, and I'll never forget his face. Complete shock and fear. "What the fuck was that?" he whispered. I shook my head, but I knew we were close to that area my dad had warned me about. The roar came again, closer this time, and without discussion, we climbed down and walked quickly back to the house. Kyle didn't ask to go hunting again that weekend. My most intense encounters started in summer 2021. I'd finished college and moved back home temporarily while figuring out my next steps. My best friend since childhood, James, was helping me clear some land near the back of our property for a potential building site. One evening in early June, we were out there until just before sunset. We were packing up our tools when James, who's always been a bit of a jokester, let out this theatrical whoop sound, kind of mimicking what you hear people do in Sasquatch TV shows. We both laughed, but then the laughter cut off abruptly when we got a response. Two clear, distinct whoops from the tree line about 100 yards to our east. James looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Tell me that was you," he said. "You know it wasn't," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. We stood there frozen for maybe 30 seconds when movement caught my eye. Just at the edge of the clearing, I saw what looked like a jet-black upright figure, about 5 feet tall, step partially from behind a tree, looked directly at us, and then step back. "James," I whispered, "don't turn around too fast, but I just saw something by that big oak." When he finally spotted it, the color drained from his face. "We need to get out of here," he said quietly. But there was a problem. The way back to the house would take us past where we'd heard the whoops, and my gut was telling me that whatever made those sounds was still there. I realized with growing dread that we were caught between what I now believe was a mother and a juvenile. "We need to go round," I said, motioning toward a longer route that would keep us in the clearing longer, but avoid the wooded area where we'd heard the calls. We started walking, trying to appear calm while keeping our eyes on the tree line. We'd made it maybe 50 yards when we heard the most terrifying sound I've ever experienced in my life, like a silverback gorilla beating sheet metal. It echoed through the trees, followed immediately by this high-speed chattering laughter sound, then another whoop from behind us and another from our right. That's when I knew we were surrounded. There weren't just two of them. There were at least 5, communicating and coordinating around us. "Run," I said, and we both took off toward the house, no longer caring about appearing calm. As we ran, we could hear movement keeping pace with us in the woods to our right, grunting, huffing sounds, and what I can only describe as growling. They were following us, staying in the tree line, moving at least as fast as we were while navigating dense forest. We made it back to the house and slammed the door behind us, both of us heaving for breath. My dad found us like that, white-faced and gasping. When we told him what happened, he just nodded slowly and said, "You boys stay closer to the house from now on." Still no acknowledgement of what we'd encountered, but I could tell he knew. That summer, James and I had at least 10 more encounters. We'd set up a camper on the property where we were staying while working, and multiple nights we'd hear rocks being thrown at the camper. Not random falling rocks, but deliberately thrown objects hitting the metal sides. One evening in July, we were walking back from the workshop, and I caught sight of what I believe was the dominant male of the group. He was massive, had to be at least 8 feet tall, with shoulders twice as wide as mine. His leg alone, as he took a step through a clearing about 80 yards away, made the famous Patterson-Gimlin film Sasquatch look small in comparison. He wasn't trying to hide, just crossing from one section of woods to another, and he looked right at us as he did it. We'd hear bipedal walking around our worksite at night, not the four-legged gait of a bear or deer, but the distinct rhythm of a two-legged creature walking upright. Sometimes we'd find our tools rearranged in the morning, or work materials moved from where we'd left them. The most unsettling thing was feeling constantly watched. You know that sensation of eyes on you? It was constant. Even in broad daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was observing us from just beyond the tree line. By August, I couldn't take it anymore. I met my now wife that summer in town, and by September I'd moved in with her at her place closer to civilization. I still help maintain my parents' property, but I don't stay overnight there anymore. The strangest part of all this. Last month, I was taking out trash at our new house in town. We're still in the same county, just in a more populated area. And I caught sight of what looked like heat distortion in the shape of a large figure at the edge of our yard, where it meets a small patch of woods. Like those cloaking stories you hear about. It was there for maybe 2 seconds, then gone. I stood there with the trash bag in my hand for a full minute, trying to process what I'd seen. Had they followed me here? Was it just my imagination after years of these experiences? I don't have answers. I don't have proof. I just know what I've experienced, what James experienced with me, and what my father seems to have known about all along but never discussed openly. I believe my family's property is home to a Sasquatch family group. I believe they've been there for generations, probably longer than our house has stood on that land. And sometimes I wonder if they consider us the intruders, not the other way around. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe because being away from the property has given me some perspective. Maybe because I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy. All I know is that those woods hold secrets, and some nights I still wake up hearing those whoops and that terrifying metallic roar in my dreams. I've never felt threatened by them exactly. Even when they chased us, they stayed in the trees. They could have caught us if they wanted to. It felt more like they were escorting us out of their territory, making sure we knew who really owned those woods. I don't go into those back sections of the property anymore. That's their space, and I respect that now. But sometimes when I'm visiting my parents and I'm alone on the porch at dusk, I'll hear those 3 distinct knocks from the forest edge. And sometimes, though I know I shouldn't, I knock back. Story 12. I've debated posting this for over 20 years now. I never told anyone except my brother, and he just laughed it off, saying I probably saw a bear. But I know what I saw wasn't a bear, not even close. This happened back in July 2000. I'd been planning this trip to Yellowstone for months. I've always been big into hiking and camping, practically grew up in the woods back in Michigan. My job was stressing me out, and I desperately needed some time away to clear my head and reconnect with nature. Yellowstone seemed perfect. I arrived in Cody, Wyoming on July 10th, spent the night at this small motel on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, just a bed and a shower. The following morning, I got up early, grabbed breakfast at some local diner, and hit the road toward the park. It was a beautiful day, clear skies, temperature in the mid-70s, with a slight breeze. Perfect hiking weather. About halfway to the park entrance, I found myself stuck in some serious tourist traffic. Lines of RVs and family vans crawling along at maybe 15 mph. I'm not the most patient person, especially when I'm antsy to get out and hit the trails. That's when I noticed this small pull-off area with what looked like an unmarked trailhead heading north away from the highway. On impulse, I decided to park there and explore for a bit while waiting for the traffic to die down. I figured I'd hike for an hour or so, then continue on to my planned route in the park. I had my day pack with water, some trail mix, my camera, and a small first aid kit, the usual stuff. I always come prepared. The trail wasn't maintained, just a faint path where others had walked before. It wound through a mix of pine forest and scrubby underbrush, gradually climbing uphill away from the road. It was peaceful, and I remember feeling this wave of relief as the sounds of traffic faded behind me. The silence was exactly what I needed. About half a mile in, I stopped to take a few photos of some unusual rock formations. That's when I heard it for the first time. The distinct sound of rocks tumbling down a slope somewhere ahead of me. My first thought was deer, since they often scatter loose rocks when moving along hillsides. I wasn't concerned, just mildly interested. I continued hiking, moving at a steady pace. Maybe 10 minutes later I heard more noises. This time it sounded like something moving through thick underbrush, down in what appeared to be a dry creek bed to my right. Snap, crack, rustle. I stopped walking and listened. The sounds stopped too. Again, I figured wildlife. This was Wyoming after all. Plenty of deer, elk, even moose in these parts. I continued walking, now paying closer attention to my surroundings. The trail narrowed as it moved between two rocky ridges. I remember noticing how the temperature seemed to drop slightly in this corridor of rock. That's when I heard more movement, this time behind me. More rocks sliding, branches breaking. I stopped again. The sounds stopped too. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then started walking again. The sounds resumed, matching my pace. This struck me as odd. Most animals I've encountered while hiking will either bolt when they detect humans or go completely still until the threat passes. This pattern of movement, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved, it felt deliberate, like I was being tracked. A slight uneasiness crept in, raising the hair on my arms. I told myself I was being paranoid, but decided to pick up my pace a bit. The sounds continued intermittently, always just out of sight, always matching my movements. By now, I'd hiked maybe 3/4 of a mile from the road. The trail was becoming less defined, requiring more scrambling over rocky terrain. I stopped at a small clearing to drink some water and figure out what to do. I stood completely still, listening intently. Nothing. Then, just as I capped my water bottle, I heard a distinct crack of a branch breaking about 50 yards away, behind a stand of pines to my left. Whatever it wasn't small, and it definitely wasn't moving like normal wildlife. That's when my instincts kicked in, and I decided to turn back. Something felt wrong. I'm not easily spooked in the woods. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, even an aggressive moose once, but this felt different. It was the deliberateness of the movement that unsettled me, like something was playing a game. I turned and started heading back toward the highway, moving at a brisk pace but not running. I didn't want to trigger any predatory instincts if this was some kind of animal. My heart was beating faster now, and I found myself scanning the surroundings constantly. The noises continued, always just out of sight, always pacing me. About a 1/4 mile from where I'd parked, I was moving through an area where the trail passed along the base of a rocky slope. I heard stones tumbling down directly to my left. It was close, maybe 50, 60 yards away. Without thinking, I whipped my head around to look, and that's when I saw it. Standing on the slope was something upright. My first confused thought was person, but immediately I knew that wasn't right. This thing was tall, maybe 7 feet or more, and covered in brown hair. Not fur like a bear, but hair. Long hair that hung from its body, especially around its head, where it was swinging at least a foot long. What struck me most was how it was standing, completely upright on 2 legs, with its arms hanging down at its sides. Not in front, like a bear would have them. The proportions were all wrong for a bear. Too tall, too thin. For a split second, our eyes met. Its face was long, somewhat flat, not at all like a bear's snout. I couldn't make out clear features from that distance, but I remember thinking it looked almost expressionless. Yet somehow I felt it observing me with intelligence. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds before it suddenly leapt sideways into denser woods with surprising agility. The movement was fluid, powerful, nothing like the lumbering gait of a bear. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, with just the swaying of branches marking its path. I stood frozen for several seconds, my mind racing to process what I'd just seen. Then pure adrenaline kicked in. I turned and moved faster toward the highway, not quite running but close to it. I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified I'd see that thing crashing through the trees after me. The quarter-mile back to my car felt like 5 miles. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the door. Once inside, I locked all the doors and sat there, breathing heavily, scanning the tree line for any movement. Nothing emerged. After maybe 10 minutes of sitting there, my heartbeat finally slowed enough that I felt safe to drive. As I pulled back onto the highway, I kept replaying the image in my mind, trying to rationalize it. Could it have been a bear standing unusually? A person in some kind of ghillie suit? Neither explanation fit what I'd seen. What's haunted me most over the years is the certainty I felt and still feel that this thing had been deliberately following me from the moment I entered those woods, not just moving in the same area, but tracking me, studying me, testing my awareness. I never made it to my planned hike in Yellowstone that day. I drove straight through the park and checked into a motel in West Yellowstone instead, where I spent a restless night jumping at every sound outside my window. The next day, I stuck to heavily populated trails where I knew there would be other hikers around. I've spent years researching what I might have seen. The long hair, upright posture, and deliberate stalking behavior don't match any known animal in the Yellowstone ecosystem. I've read about Bigfoot encounters, but this didn't quite match those descriptions either. This creature seemed leaner, more agile. What bothers me most, even now, is how it moved. That calculated stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. That's not random animal behavior. That's predatory intelligence. Something was assessing me, maybe deciding if I was worth pursuing. I've gone back to Yellowstone many times since then. It's still one of my favorite places. But I've never returned to that unmarked trail off the highway. And to this day, whenever I'm hiking alone and hear rocks tumbling down a slope, my blood runs cold and I find myself scanning the hillsides, half expecting to see that long-haired figure watching me from between the trees. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it. All I know is that for about an hour on a July day in 2000, something followed me through the woods near Yellowstone. Something that moved like no animal I've ever seen. Something that watched me with what I can only describe as purpose. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has encountered it in those woods, or if it's still there, watching and waiting for another lone hiker to venture off the marked trails. I wonder if next time it might do more than just follow. Story 13. I've been holding this in for almost 3 years now, but I think it's time I finally talk about what my brother Marcus and I saw near the North Fork. I've read enough accounts here to know I'm not going to be ridiculed, and honestly, I need to get this off my chest. This happened in late September 2020. Marcus and I had been going up to the designated timber area between Cody and Yellowstone for years to cut firewood for the winter. We're both pretty outdoorsy guys, grew up hunting, fishing, camping, you name it. My brother is 32, I'm 28, and we've spent our entire lives in Wyoming. We know our wildlife, we know our forests. What we saw that day, that wasn't anything we'd ever seen before. We'd gotten a late start that Saturday because Marcus's truck had been acting up. By the time we got it running right and made the drive out, it was already past noon. The timber area is about a 40-minute drive from Cody, following the North Fork Highway as it winds alongside the Shoshone River. It's beautiful country, steep mountains on either side of the river valley, dense pine forests, occasional clearings. In September, the aspens were just starting to turn golden. We finally pulled off onto the Forest Service road that led to our usual spot. It was one of those perfect Wyoming fall days. Crisp air, clear blue sky, temperature in the high 50s. The kind of day where you can see for miles. We were both just happy to be out of town, away from everything. Our spot was about half a mile from the river. in an area where there were plenty of deadfall trees we could cut up without having to fell anything. We unloaded the chainsaws, axes, and gear from Marcus's F-150 and got to work. For about 4 hours, we just cut wood, loaded the truck, and bullshitted about work, family stuff, and the upcoming hunting season. Normal brother things. It must have been around 5 p.m. when I noticed something on the far slope. The sun was getting lower, casting that golden hour light across the landscape. I was taking a water break, leaning against the truck when something caught my eye. Movement on the opposite side of the valley, across the river. "Hey," I said to Marcus, pointing. "You see that? Up on that north-facing slope." Marcus squinted. "What am I looking for?" "I don't know. Something big just moved through that clearing. I thought maybe a bear or an elk." Marcus shrugged and went to the truck cab. "Hold on, I've got my binos." He came back with his Bushnells, decent 10x42 binoculars he used for hunting. He raised them to his eyes and scanned the slope for maybe 30 seconds. Then I saw his posture change. His whole body just tensed up. "What?" I asked. "What is it?" Without lowering the binoculars, he said, "Daniel, you need to see this." His voice had this weird, tight quality to it. He handed me the binoculars, his hands slightly shaky. I remember thinking it was odd because Marcus isn't the type to get rattled easily. He's been a hunting guide in the Absarokas for over a decade. He's encountered grizzlies, moose, you name it. I raised the binoculars to my eyes and tried to find what he was looking at but couldn't see anything at first. "It was right at the tree line," Marcus said. "It just went into the trees, but wait, there, lower, in that clearing with the dead pine." I adjusted my view, and that's when I saw it. My stomach dropped immediately. Through the binoculars I could clearly see a figure walking, not running, not lumbering, but walking deliberately, across a small clearing about 300-400 yards away. The first thing that hit me was that it was upright, completely upright on 2 legs, and it was massive, just massive. I've seen bears stand up. I've seen them walk a few paces on their hind legs. This wasn't that. This thing was walking naturally, arms swinging slightly at its sides, with a stride that covered ground quickly, despite not seeming hurried. The hair covering it was dark, not black, but a deep brown that looked almost reddish in the late afternoon sun. And the build. That's what really got me. This wasn't some lean, athletic-looking creature. It looked almost stocky. Not fat exactly, but incredibly thick through the torso and limbs, powerfully built in a way that made it look almost barrel-chested. I watched it walk across that clearing for what must have been 15-20 seconds, though it felt much longer. It never dropped to all fours. Not once. It moved with purpose, heading down slope toward the river. "Are you seeing this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," was all I could manage. My mouth had gone completely dry. "That's not a bear," he said. "No, definitely not a bear." The figure reached the edge of the clearing and disappeared into the trees again. I kept the binoculars trained on that spot, waiting for it to reappear, but it didn't. I finally lowered the binoculars and looked at Marcus. His face was pale. "How tall would you say?" he asked. I thought about it. It was hard to judge scale at that distance, but there was a fallen tree in the clearing that I'd seen enough to estimate. 8 feet? Maybe more, I said. "It's hard to tell from here. And the build." Marcus shook his head. "I've never seen anything like that. Even a grizzly doesn't look that substantial." We both stood there for a few minutes, scanning the slope, trying to catch another glimpse. Nothing. The forest had swallowed it up. "Should we pack up?" I asked. The sun was getting lower, and suddenly the idea of being out there as darkness fell didn't seem appealing. Marcus hesitated. "We've got about another hour of daylight. Let's finish loading what we've already cut and get out of here." So that's what we did. We worked quickly, barely talking, both of us constantly glancing across the valley. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, the distant rush of the river, seemed different now. like we were hearing everything more acutely. We were almost done loading the truck when we heard it. The sound is something I'll never forget as long as I live. It started as a high-pitched, almost squealing noise that echoed down the valley from upriver. It wasn't particularly loud, but it carried. It wasn't an elk bugle. We were in the middle of rut season, and we'd been hearing elk all day. This was completely different. The pitch was wrong, the modulation was wrong, and it had this quality to it, almost like it contained words, but in no language I've ever heard. The sound lasted maybe 6 to 7 seconds, then stopped. Marcus and I froze, staring at each other. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Marcus just shook his head. "I don't know." Then we heard it again, closer this time. The same high-pitched, undulating squeal, but now with a deeper undertone, like two sounds layered over each other. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "We need to go," Marcus said, grabbing the last few pieces of firewood and tossing them into the truck bed. "Now!" I didn't argue. We quickly gathered our tools, threw them in the back, and jumped in the cab. Marcus started the engine, and I remember feeling a wave of relief at the sound. He turned the truck around and started driving back toward the main road faster than was probably safe on the rough Forest Service track. As we drove, I kept looking out the window, scanning the trees. The forest suddenly seemed much darker, much denser than it had earlier in the day. We were about halfway back to the highway when Marcus suddenly hit the brakes. The truck skidded slightly on the gravel road. "What?" I started to say, but then I saw it. About 50 yards ahead, something large moved across the road. It was just a dark shape in the fading light, visible for only a second or two before it disappeared into the trees on the other side. But it was big, and it was moving fast. "Did you see that?" Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Yeah." My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Marcus hesitated, then put the truck back in gear. "Hold on," he said, and hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel. We accelerated down the road, past the spot where the figure had crossed. I craned my neck, trying to see into the forest on that side, but it was too dark among the trees. We made it to the highway without seeing anything else. Only once we were on the paved road, heading back toward Cody, with other cars occasionally passing, did I start to feel the tension ease slightly. "What did we just see?" I finally asked. Marcus was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he said at last. "But it wasn't a bear. Could it have been a person? Maybe someone in a ghillie suit or something?" Even as I said it, I knew it was ridiculous. No human could move like that, with that gait, that size. Marcus just gave me a look. "No," I admitted, "not a person." We drove in silence for several miles. The sky had turned deep purple, the last of the daylight fading. Stars were becoming visible overhead. "You know what it looked like," Marcus finally said. I did know. We both did. But saying it out loud seemed absurd. "A Sasquatch," I said anyway. The word hung in the truck cab like something physical. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, but not like what you see in those blurry photos or videos. Not like the stereotypical image." "No," I agreed. "The size, yes. But the build was different. And that sound—" "I've been hunting these mountains for 15 years, Marcus said. "I've heard every animal out here. I've never heard anything make a sound like that." When we got back to Cody, we unloaded the wood at my place in silence. Before Marcus left, we agreed not to tell anyone what we'd seen. Who would believe us? We'd sound crazy. And honestly, part of me wanted to just forget it had happened. But I haven't been able to forget. Not one detail. I've spent countless hours researching since then, reading accounts, looking at reports of sightings in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Most descriptions don't match what we saw. They talk about tall, lanky figures. What we saw was massive all around, broad, thick, powerful. And that noise. I've tried to find recordings of similar sounds. Nothing comes close. The closest I can describe it is like a cross between a woman's scream and some kind of speech, but distorted and stretched out. It didn't sound like it came from an animal throat, but it didn't sound human either. I haven't been back to that spot since. Neither has Marcus. We still cut firewood, but we find other areas further from the North Fork. I've caught myself scanning hillsides more than I used to, looking for movement, listening more carefully to forest sounds. What bothers me most isn't just what we saw. It's knowing that whatever it was aware of us too. It crossed the road ahead of us deliberately. It made those sounds, knowing we would hear them. It wanted us to know it was there, and sometimes when I'm alone at night, I wonder if it's still out there, if it remembers us the way we remember it, if it's watching, waiting for us to return. I don't know what we saw that day. I just know it changed something in me. There are things in those mountains that don't appear in any wildlife guide. Things that have been there long before us, watching from the tree line as we cut our firewood and drive our trucks and pretend we understand the wilderness. We don't. We never did. Story 14. In 2007, my husband Mark and I were gifted a hunting cabin from his uncle and aunt in the Cypress Hills of Saskatchewan. They were getting older and couldn't make the trip out there anymore. It was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place with a small kitchen and living area, but it sat on about 15 acres of densely wooded land. We were thrilled. As city folks from Regina, having our own little wilderness retreat seemed like a dream. Our kids, Liam and Clara, both around 10 at the time, absolutely loved it. Every weekend we could manage, we'd pack up the SUV and make the 3-hour drive. They'd spend hours exploring the woods, building forts and playing games while Mark and I relaxed on the porch, occasionally joining their adventures. Those first few summers were magical. The first weird thing happened in the summer of 2009. Liam and Clara had built this elaborate fort about a quarter-mile into the woods. They'd spent weeks on it, dragging fallen branches, using some old tarps Mark had given them, creating little seats inside from stumps. They were so proud of it. One Saturday morning, they ran back to the cabin nearly in tears. Their fort had been completely destroyed, not just knocked over but thoroughly demolished. The branches were scattered everywhere, the tarps torn down, and their little seat stumps tossed several yards away. Mark assured them it was probably just the wind, or maybe some animals, though privately he told me it looked too deliberate. He helped them rebuild it, making it sturdier this time. A week later, the same thing happened. This time, Liam was convinced someone was messing with them. Clara, always more imaginative, suggested it might be forest people. Mark and I laughed it off, but I remember feeling uneasy. We were pretty isolated out there. Our nearest neighbors were over a mile away. The kids decided to leave peace offerings at their fort, granola bars, apples, and once a peanut butter sandwich. Mark thought it was cute and played along. The weird part, the food would always be gone the next day. We assumed it was raccoons or maybe deer, though deep down something felt off about the whole situation. Life went on. The fort destructions happened a few more times, but the kids eventually built their fort closer to the cabin, where it seemed to stay intact. We chalked it up to animals or teenagers from nearby cabins playing pranks. Fast forward to 2015. Liam and Clara were teenagers now, 16 and 15. They asked if they could have a couple friends over for a camping trip at the old fort site. They'd rebuilt it again, bigger and better, and wanted to sleep out there. Their friends Max and Jessica were coming along. Mark and I agreed, thinking they were old enough to handle a night in the woods. They had cell phones, a large flashlight, and it wasn't far from the cabin. What could go wrong? Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to frantic pounding on our door. All 4 kids were on our porch, hysterical. Clara was sobbing uncontrollably. Jessica was shaking so hard she could barely speak. Liam's face was white as a sheet, and Max kept saying, "No way, man, no way," over and over. When we finally calmed them down enough to explain, Liam told us they'd been telling ghost stories in the fort when they heard strange noises outside, like something large moving around the perimeter. At first, they thought it was us playing a joke. Then they heard a weird whistling sound, almost like a bird, but not quite right. Liam had opened the door of the fort and shined his flashlight out. What he saw still haunts me to this day, the way he described it. A massive figure, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark hair, standing just yards away. When the light hit it, the thing had swatted the beam away like it was annoyed, and then it screamed. Not like a human scream. Liam said it was more like a roar mixed with a high-pitched shriek that seemed to go right through you. The kids bolted immediately. Liam said the thing chased them. Jessica was crying as she told us it had grabbed her ponytail from behind, actually pulling her backward before letting go and veering off into the woods. They ran straight back to the cabin without looking back. Mark got his rifle and walked outside, but there was nothing there. We called the local police, who came out the next morning. The officer looked around the fort area and found nothing conclusive, just some broken branches and what might have been large footprints, but the ground was too hard to tell for sure. He suggested the kids might have spooked themselves with ghost stories, and a deer or bear had startled them. The hair pulling? Mass hysteria, he implied. I'm ashamed to admit we half believed the officer. Not that the kids were lying exactly, but that they'd exaggerated what happened in their fear. Max and Jessica never came back to our cabin. In fact, Jessica's parents called us later that week, upset about their daughter having nightmares. The kids refused to go near that part of the woods again. Eventually, they lost interest in the cabin altogether as they got older. By 2018, both were in college, and our visits became less frequent. Then Mark passed away in 2020, heart attack, completely unexpected. He was only 52. After the funeral, I couldn't bear to sell the cabin. It held too many memories of our family together, so I started going there alone, usually just for weekends, to think and heal. Last summer, July 2022, I had my own encounter. I'd been in town having dinner with a couple I'd befriended who owned a cabin about 5 miles from mine. I stayed later than I'd planned, and it was fully dark when I drove back, around 10:30 p.m. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, enjoying the quiet. That's when I heard it. The same bird-like whistle the kids had described 7 years earlier. It came from the woods, not too far away, and it definitely wasn't any bird I recognized. It had this odd pattern to it, almost like it was trying to mimic a tune. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my purse and keys and made a dash for the front door. As I fumbled with the lock, something hit the side of the house with a tremendous bang. Not like a branch falling, but like something had slammed into it deliberately. The whole cabin shook. I got inside, locked the door, and turned on every light in the place. Then I sat in the living room with a kitchen knife beside me until morning, too terrified to look outside or even peek through the curtains. When daylight came, I checked the side of the cabin. There was a dent in the wood siding about 6 feet up. Whatever had hit it hard. That's when I knew my kids had been telling the truth all along. Something was out there, something big. I started researching. I read everything I could find about strange encounters in the Cypress Hills. It wasn't much, but there were a few reports from hunters and hikers about odd experiences, unexplained noises, destroyed camps, feelings of being watched, and footprints, big footprints, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. I never would have believed it before, but now I'm convinced that's what we've been dealing with all these years. It explains everything, the destroyed forts, the taken food, what chased my kids that night. I've made some changes since then. I adopted 2 rescue dogs, big ones, that stay with me at the cabin. I've created a safe area for them under the deck with walls and a heavy door they can get to through a doggy door from the house. I've installed motion-activated lights all around the property, and I never ever go outside after dark. The locals I've cautiously mentioned this to either think I'm crazy or they nod knowingly and change the subject. One old-timer at the general store told me, "Those things have been in these hills longer than people. Best to leave them be." Then he walked away before I could ask any more questions. I've learned that they seem to be most active in spring and summer. By late fall, the activity dies down. I think they might migrate or hibernate, I'm not sure, but I know they'll be back when the weather warms. What bothers me most is that for years I didn't believe my own children. I let them think they were just seeing things, that their fear wasn't valid. I'll never forgive myself for that. I still go to the cabin regularly. Maybe that sounds crazy, but it's my last connection to Mark and the happy years we had there as a family. But I'm careful now. I don't leave food out. I make noise when I'm outside during the day, so nothing gets surprised by my presence. And I talk to the woods sometimes, just to let whatever's out there know that I respect its space. Liam and Clara know about my experience now. Clara said simply, "I told you, Mum. Liam wants me to sell the place, but I can't. Not yet. I'm not sure what I'm looking for by sharing this. Validation, advice, maybe just to warn others who might have cabins in remote areas to listen to their kids when they say something's not right. One thing I know for certain, we weren't alone in those woods. We never were. And whatever's out there, it's been watching us the whole time. This spring, I'll be going back up to open the cabin for the season. The dogs will come with me, of course. And this time, I'll be prepared. Not to confront anything, I'm not that foolish, but to coexist. Those creatures were there long before us, and they'll be there long after. Sometimes at night, I still hear that whistle in my dreams, and I wake up wondering if it's trying to tell me something or warn me. Story 15. I still can't believe what happened to me almost 30 years ago, but I need to get this off my chest. I've only told a few people over the years because most would think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. It was September 1995, and my friend Lisa and I were bored out of our minds. We lived in Grande Prairie, Alberta, and there wasn't much for two 19-year-olds to do on weekends except drive around. Lisa had just gotten her license and was always looking for excuses to drive her dad's old Chevy Cavalier. "Let's check out that old cemetery at 12 Mile Ridge," she suggested that Saturday afternoon. "My cousin said it's super creepy." I wasn't really into graveyards, but it was better than sitting around watching TV reruns. Plus, it was a beautiful fall day, perfect for a drive in the country. We packed some snacks and sodas and headed out around 4 p.m. The drive took about 40 minutes, mostly down rural roads surrounded by thick forests. The further we got from town, the more isolated it felt. The cemetery was pretty remote, tucked away down a gravel road that wound through dense pine and spruce trees. When we arrived, the place looked abandoned. It was an old pioneer cemetery with maybe 30 or 40 graves, most dating back to the early 1900s. A rusted wrought iron fence surrounded it, with a gate that creaked when we pushed it open. Even though it was still daylight, shadows were getting longer as the sun began its descent. "Let's explore a bit," Lisa said, pulling out her disposable camera. She was always taking pictures of weird stuff. We wandered around reading the gravestones for about an hour. Some were so weathered you could barely make out the names. Others had interesting carvings or sad inscriptions about children who died young. It was fascinating in a morbid sort of way, but nothing scary. As the sun started getting lower, Lisa pointed to a hill behind the cemetery. "Want to check out the view from up there?" I shrugged. "Sure, why not?" We climbed over the back fence and started up the hill. It wasn't very steep, but it was covered in tall grass and scattered with pine trees. As we got further from the cemetery, I started noticing something odd. It was completely silent. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just the sound of our footsteps crushing the grass. "It's really quiet up here," I said, feeling a strange uneasiness creep over me. Lisa nodded. "Yeah, kinda weird." We reached the top of the hill, which opened to a small clearing. The view wasn't anything special, just more trees stretching out to the horizon. But what caught my attention was a small structure at the edge of the clearing. It was this pyramid-shaped building, maybe 8 or 9 feet tall, with a door on one side. "What's that?" I asked. Lisa walked over to it. "I think it's an outhouse. Probably for forest rangers or something." It looked old and weathered, painted a faded brown that was peeling in spots. By now, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. "We should probably head back soon," I said, checking my watch. It was almost 7 p.m. and I didn't want to navigate those country roads in the dark. "Yeah, just let me use this bathroom first," Lisa said. "I've been holding it forever." While she went in, I walked around the perimeter of the clearing, kicking at pine cones and trying to ignore the strange silence. That's when I got the feeling someone, or something, was watching me. You know that prickly feeling on the back of your neck? It was like that, but 10 times stronger. I turned around slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing looked out of place, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then I realized I needed to pee too, so I decided to wait for Lisa to finish. When she came out, I said, "My turn," trying to sound casual, even though I was feeling increasingly uneasy. "I'll wait by that big tree." She pointed to a large pine about 20 feet away. "These mosquitoes are killing me." She swatted at her arms and walked off. The outhouse was disgusting inside, cobwebs in every corner, and a smell that made me breathe through my mouth. I tried to be quick, hovering awkwardly over the seat. That's when I heard it, a heavy breathing sound coming from outside right next to the building. At first, I thought it was Lisa playing a joke, but then I smelled something awful. It wasn't the usual outhouse smell. This was different, musky and wild, like wet animal fur mixed with something rotting. My heart started pounding. I pulled up my jeans with shaking hands and stood frozen, trying to decide what to do. The breathing continued, deep and rhythmic, definitely not human. I had to look. I cracked the door open just enough to peek out. What I saw will stay with me forever. Standing not 3 feet away was a creature I can only describe as massive. It was at least 7 feet tall, maybe more, covered in light brown hair that wasn't quite like anything I'd seen before. The hair on its body was sparser, but thick on its limbs. Its face was the most terrifying part. It looked almost ape-like, with deep-set eyes that seemed to stare right through me. There wasn't much facial hair, but the hair on its head was coarse and long, reminding me somehow of a horse's mane. It didn't seem to notice me at first. It was sniffing the air, its nostrils flaring. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream or move. My mind kept repeating, "This isn't real, this isn't real," but I knew it was. Somehow, I managed to take a deep breath and push the door open wider. I stepped out as calmly as I could, avoiding eye contact with the creature. Every instinct told me to run, but I'd heard somewhere that running triggers predators to chase. So I walked, as steadily as my trembling legs would allow, back toward the direction of the cemetery. I'd taken maybe 5 steps when I heard Lisa yell, "Amber, hurry up!" The creature's head snapped in her direction, then back to me. That's when I knew it had been aware of me the whole time. I couldn't help it. I glanced back. The thing was following me, moving in this bizarre way, with its front limbs on the ground and its rear end raised up like it was in a half-standing position. Its head was low, and it was sniffing the air behind me, closing the gap between us to just a few feet. "Run!" Lisa screamed, and this time I didn't hesitate. I sprinted down the hill, stumbling over roots and rocks, the adrenaline making everything seem like slow motion. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, gaining ground. The musty smell grew stronger. I reached the cemetery fence and practically dove over it, scraping my arm on the rusty metal but barely feeling it. Lisa was already at the car, frantically trying to unlock the driver's door with shaking hands. "Start the car!" I screamed, running across the cemetery. I risked another look back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature had stopped at the fence and risen to its full height. Standing upright, it was even more terrifying. Massive shoulders, long arms, and a bulk that no human could match. It opened its mouth and let out a sound I still hear in my nightmares, somewhere between a scream and a roar, echoing through the silent forest. I reached the car just as Lisa got the door unlocked. We both scrambled inside, and she fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to get them in the ignition. "Go, go, go!" I yelled, locking my door and looking back through the rear window. The creature had entered the cemetery and was moving toward us, faster now, swinging its long arms as it ran on two legs. Its movements were fluid and powerful, covering ground quickly. The engine started with a roar, and Lisa slammed the car into reverse, then drive, spinning gravel as we tore out of the small parking area. I kept my eyes on the rear window, watching as the creature followed us to the edge of the gravel road before stopping. It stood there, silhouetted against the darkening sky, watching our car disappear down the road. "What the hell was that?" Lisa screamed, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "I don't know." We drove in terrified silence for a few miles before Lisa pulled over at a gas station. We were both trembling so badly we could barely speak. I had scratches on my arm from the fence, and Lisa had mosquito bites all over, but otherwise we were physically unharmed. Mentally, though, that's a different story. "Should we call the police?" Lisa finally asked. I thought about it for a moment. "And tell them what? That we saw Bigfoot? They'll think we're crazy or on drugs." But we did end up calling, not the police, but Lisa's uncle who worked for the forestry department. He took us seriously enough to go out there the next day with a couple of his colleagues. They found nothing except some tufts of hair caught on the cemetery fence where I'd seen the creature. They collected the hair samples, but I never heard what became of them. We never went back to 12 Mile Ridge. In fact, I avoided forests altogether for years after that. Lisa and I didn't talk about it much. It was like we had an unspoken agreement to try and forget. But how do you forget something like that? I've spent nearly 30 years trying to make sense of what happened that day. I've read every book and article I could find about Sasquatch sightings in Alberta. There have been other reports in that region, though none as detailed as what we experienced. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, the creature's screams echoing in my mind. What terrifies me most isn't just what I saw, but how it behaved. The way it followed me, sniffing, studying. It was intelligent, curious. It wasn't just some animal reacting on instinct. It was observing us, maybe even stalking us. I've moved away from Grande Prairie since then, but I still have family there. My cousin told me that part of the forest was logged about 10 years after our encounter, and the old cemetery was relocated. The pyramid outhouse is long gone. Sometimes I wonder if destroying that habitat drove whatever it was deeper into the wilderness, or if it's still out there, watching hikers and campers who have no idea what lurks among the trees. I know most people won't believe my story. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived it. But I know what I saw that September evening in 1995. I saw something that shouldn't exist but does, something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the world around us. Sometimes when I'm driving past forests, especially at dusk, I get that same prickly feeling on the back of my neck, and I remember the silence, that unnatural silence that fell over the woods before it appeared. That silence was a warning, and it's one I'll never ignore again. A few years ago, I almost convinced myself it was just a bear, that my teenage imagination had transformed it into something more fantastic. But then I remember the face, those eyes, the way it moved. Half human, half animal. No bear stands and runs like that. No bear makes that sound. Lisa and I lost touch after college. Last I heard, she moved to Vancouver and never talks about what happened. I don't blame her. Who would want to remember coming face to face with something that defies explanation? So that's my story. 30 years later, and I still check my locks twice at night. I still avoid hiking alone. And I still wonder what would have happened if I'd been just a little slower getting back to that car. What did it want? Was it just curious? Or did we narrowly escape something much worse? I guess I'll never know. And maybe that's for the best.